Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and on the screen to the right of me is Dr. Jonathan Pritchett, and on the other side of the screen for me is Dr. Tim Stratton. And we are here, now he's in the middle. So now we're here today to talk about an interesting theological position, and that position is that of Molinism. And if you're familiar with the ongoing debates between Calvinists, Arminians, and what has come to be known as provisionists and others. Well, this is sort of a philosophical, theological framework that kind of exists within that discussion, that domain. And in fact, I'm going to introduce Tim and let him explain to us in brief, very briefly, what Molinism is. Before I do that, I just want to say, if you'd like to be on the show today, whether you have a camera or you just want to call in and do audio, you can do that by clicking the link that is in the live chat pinned at the top or in the description to this video. It's there as well. We just ask that you be respectful, but come on and talk to us about this. And we've already got a couple of people ready to go. Tim, why don't you go ahead and welcome to the show and open us up? By the way, Tim is a professor at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, where you can start learning theology and study these subjects with under a shepherding model where you have people helping you through that, professors and instructors, and you can do that from right there where you're at home, and you can do it in your pajamas. Nobody's going to see you, and you don't even have to come to campus for the graduation, although we would love to see you there. And Tim teaches for us. All of us are teaching at that school. And Tim, I'd like to go ahead and just pass it over to you, brother, and let you go ahead and familiarize us a bit with Molinism and whatever else you might want to say to open the show.
All right. Well, just in a nutshell, I advance a position called mere Molinism. Molinism comes from the last name, or it's derived from the last name of a Spanish theologian in the 16th century known as Luis de Molina. So you get Molina, Molinism. I actually hate the word Molinism. It sounds like a skin condition, but that's what we're left with right now. And I don't agree with Molina on a lot of things, but I think he got two things exactly right. And this is what I refer to as mere Molinism. And so before we even get started, one can I just want to say that you can bracket salvation, soteriological matters, which is what Calvinism and Arminianism is. So, bracket tulip and just go straight to, do humans ever have libertarian freedom? And if so, does God possess middle knowledge of these? So let me back up. Mere Molinism is simply the affirmation of two propositions. The first one is that humans, at least occasionally, exercise libertarian freedom. And the second is that God, prior to his creative decree, knew how these free agents would freely choose if he were to create them in these circumstances. So with those two propositions in mind, you get what I refer to as mere Molinism. Again, that's humans sometimes exercise libertarian freedom, and God had middle knowledge prior to creation of these free actions. So I also, controversially, I might add, refer to myself as a Reformed theologian, although I reject Calvinism. I reject both tulip and, more importantly, in my estimation, what I refer to as exhaustive divine determinism. But mere Molinism gives you exhaustive divine predestination of all things, which is different, I explain and deductively conclude, than determinism of all things. So you can have predestination of all things without the determinism or determination of all things, which then allows humans to have a strong, robust sense of freedom, known as libertarian free will or simply libertarian freedom. But you see how God can predestine even libertarian free acts. So with that in mind, you get a strong sense of predestination. You can say literally that God ordains all things and God decrees all things and God is sovereign over all things. And that the providence of God is this, just robust on this view, but it rejects the determination of all things. So it's really, before we get started, I need to define a couple terms. Let's start with probably what's going to be the most important It typically is anyway in these discussions. And that's, hey, what do we mean when we say exhaustive divine determination or divine determinism or something like what does it mean for an event to be determined? And it's simply this: an event is determined if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate the event. Let me say that again. An event is determined if and only if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate the event. And so that's what I mean by determined. A lot of people will confuse and conflate predestination or decree with determinism, but those are not the same thing. And we can get into that as we go further today. But yeah, libertarian freedom then is logically incompatible with the idea that something or someone else determines all things. If that's true, then a person is never free from antecedent necessity. So you never have this, you don't have sourcehood freedom where you're the actual source of at least some of your actions, mental and or physical. That is never the case if exhaustive determination is true, whether we're talking about natural determination or divine determination. Also, if that's the case, if everything is determined, then you never have the principle of alternative possibilities. You never have alternative possibilities where you could have done otherwise. So, every time the Christian sins, he could not have done otherwise. There is nothing he could have done about that because it was determined by an antecedent necessity. So that's some big words. I'll just start with that. I reject exhaustive determination. I do affirm that God determines some things, but not all things. And we just have to, I want to make sure that we're on the same page so that we don't talk past each other. But yeah, let's see what kind of questions.
Yeah. So we're going right to the calls. Thank you for that, Tim. But before we do, I just want to say real quickly, if that sounded really academic to you, well, that makes sense. But here's the 30,000-foot view, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, what's going on is God is away. If someone were to ask you after church on Sunday, hey, do you think that God, or if you ask someone, some little old man, little old lady, do you think that God knows everything? Well, yeah, of course. Do you think that God knows everything that ever has happened? Yes. Do you think that God knows everything that will happen? Yes. Well, what about this? Do you think God knows what would have happened if we hadn't had this conversation and we had gone and had other conversations? And do you think he can't be wrong about that? Then most people might say yes, but if that's you, then you might be on your way to becoming a Molinist, because that is the key idea, that God's aware of all the different ways that the world could have gone, possible worlds, we might say, all the different ways he could create. And of those worlds, he chose the worlds of free creatures where people have free will that perhaps most align with his ultimate will. And as a result of that, maybe there are issues that could be taken with that. But he chooses to make one of those worlds, actualize that world. So he chose worlds of free creatures, but he has to. The only way he can do that is if he knows what could have happened under other circumstances. And so it's a way to hold on to a high degree of a certain definition of sovereignty, and yet at the same time, libertarian freedom on the part of man. All right, with that, let's just jump right in. And Ben was here first. So Ben, we're going to bring you in. And my understanding is that you are not a Calvinist, but also not a Molinist. And so you feel free to ask your question.
But he is a good friend. And we were actually roommates in Boston at the Evangelical Philosophical Society last month. So Ben and I love to disagree with each other on things, but we find a lot to agree on as well. For example, we're both Nebraska Cornhusker fans, and we both love the band Stavesaker from back in the 90s. So there you go.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not a Calvinist, so I might not be the target here. So I don't want to take much of your time, Tim. So just backtracking with some of the introduction, Braxton, you said that if you accept that God knows all possible outcomes, I think I do accept that. and that's what Molinism and others would call natural knowledge. What is unique to Molinism is something called middle knowledge, where the Molinists would also accept that God knows what we would have done were we in various circumstances, and that's slightly different than what could have done. I think that I know Tim would agree with that. So I actually don't believe that God has middle knowledge, but I do believe he would have natural knowledge. I think most Calvinists would agree with God having natural knowledge. That is, knowledge of all possible worlds, whereas middle knowledge is knowledge of all what Molinists call feasible worlds. So I would deny that God has knowledge. Now, I think an important concept here is that might be obvious, but the number of feasible worlds is a smaller number of worlds than the number of possible worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, to get from the logical moment of God's natural knowledge to the logical moment of God's middle knowledge, some possible worlds have to be excluded from obtaining. Meaning they're still considered to be possible worlds, but they're not considered to be feasible worlds.
Right.
And that means that God cannot create the non-feasible worlds. Those worlds are not options for him.
Right.
Right. Yeah, okay. So the question and kind of the objection I would have to Molinism is who excludes the non-feasible worlds from obtaining? Now, I think that on Molinism, that exclusion has to occur prior to God having middle knowledge, which is also prior to the divine decree. It's also prior to creation. So that means that God is the only actor that exists. He's the only actor. He's the only free agent that exists when this exclusion of non-feasible worlds from obtaining must occur. So I think that means on Molinism, God has to be the one who is saying or excluding those non-feasible worlds from obtaining. And that means we're not. And if we're not, the short version of my argument is we're not the ones who's doing the excluding. That means we do not have free will. In the second sense that Tim describes. So he describes a sordid definition of free will and also the principle of alternate possibilities. But I would argue that Molinism actually is not compatible with human beings or creatures having free will in the second sense. That is the principle of alternate possibilities, because we're unable to exclude possible worlds from obtaining Molinism. That's the long and short of it.
All right. And by the way, before Tim answers, I just want people to know, we know, and Ben knows, that he sounds like he's been in the bottom of a sarlacc pit. But he's on vacation. He's using his phone. But that's okay. I think we got the key elements of the question there, Tim.
Oh, well, I hope I had a hard time understanding all of it. So Ben, I'll let you kind of follow up. Did I hear correctly that you said who decides what feasible worlds are not actualizable or something along those lines?
Who decides which possible worlds are not feasible worlds?
Okay. So a possible world is one that's just logically possible. A feasible world is, a non-feasible. So the difference, and you said it, pretty sure I heard you correctly, that the subset of feasible worlds are smaller than all the possible worlds. So what's possible is just what's logically possible. So it's possible that God could create a world with unicorns, even if he never does. We say, well, that's a possible world. There's nothing incoherent about a horse with a horn, with a single horn on its head. So that's a possible world that we don't think actually exists. But a feasible world is when you bring in libertarian freedom into the scenario. So is it possible for God to create a libertarian free agent? And I like to say, is it possible for God to create the kind of beings that are described in 1 Corinthians 10:13? We can get into that later. But I argue that that's a libertarian agent there. So is it possible for God to create a libertarian free agent? That seems to be a possible world, even if one doesn't think that libertarian free agents actually exist. Most will say, well, yeah, an omnipotent God has that power to create free creatures who can act as first movers, at least on occasion. So that's a possible world, even if one doesn't think it actually exists. With that said, if it's possible for God to create a free creature, then say if the free creature would never freely choose, to wear a tuxedo, then God can't create a world where he freely chooses to wear a tuxedo. He could, however, determine the guy to wear a tuxedo. So then at that point, it's a possible world for the guy to wear a tuxedo, but not to freely choose to wear it. Now, this starts to make a lot more sense when we talk about love, and I argue that love requires libertarian freedom because you can't force a free agent to freely choose to love in return. I also argue that libertarian freedom is essential for rationality, for theological knowledge, for robust morality, so on and so forth. So now let's just say it's logically possible for Christopher Hitchens to love Jesus into eternity, right? I don't believe that occurred. I believe that Christopher Hitchens died rejecting Christ. So let's just assume C.S. Lewis's great divorce model of hell, and that it is eternal conscious torment, or not even torment, just eternal conscious separation. Or we can even assume, like Chris states, annihilationism, and we can say, okay, well, Christopher Hitchens is eternally separated from the love of God because Christopher Hitchens freely chose to reject it. Now, but it was logically possible for Christopher Hitchens to accept it. I believe that God pursued him and gave him prevenient grace, and that Christopher Hitchens ultimately rejected that. And so, although it was logically possible for Christopher Hitchens to be saved and in a true eternal love relationship with Christ, if there is no possible, it could be the case that in every world that God gives Christopher Hitchens libertarian freedom so that he can love in return, in every single world, Christopher Hitchens rejects it. And so if that's the case, then it would be just as impossible for God to create a married bachelor as it would be for God to create a world in which Christopher Hitchens freely chooses to love in response to God's love. So there's the difference. It's not that somebody decides, well, Christopher Hitchens decided what possible world would not be feasible for God to create. That was Christopher Hitchens' choice. And so that would be, so in that case, it's not God who decides that Christopher Hitchens is damned. God simply can't create a world where he freely chooses to love God into the infinite future. Now, in the academic literature, I've co-authored a paper with Jacobus Erasmus, and we offer the idea that God created the one feasible, freedom-permitting world where evil is ultimately destroyed and everybody who is not trans-world damned is saved. And so that gets us around problems like, well, how come, poor Richard Dawkins, he would have been a Christian in some other world where Tim Stratton was an atheist, but lucky Tim Stratton got, God created this world. So what we advance gets around that problem, and also leaves open the idea of hopeful universalism. I don't think universalism is true, but I hope for it and show that it's possible on Molinism. In fact, I think Molinism gives it its best shot. With all that said, let me give it back to you, Ben. What follow-up question would you have for me now that I said it's Christopher Hitchens who decides what possible world is not, won't be feasible, won't be logically possible for God to actualize?
Yeah, and maybe this follow-up question, because it's kind of hard to engage, Ben, with your mic the way it is. Maybe just kind of let this be your last question or statement.
Okay. So the question I have.
I can't hear him.
We're not able to hear you now for some reason, Ben.
I think he's on.
Hello.
We're having trouble with it, Ben. Okay, maybe we can get you back later in the show to continue. Try one more time. Speak to us.
How about this?
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that works. So the question I have for the Molinists is, does God eliminate all possible worlds from obtaining at the divine decree except for the actual world?
Did you guys understand that?
It sounded like he said, does he eliminate all other possible worlds except the actual world after the decree? Is that what you said? Yeah.
You know, we actually had a student who says no to that question, but that was one of Braxton Hunter's doctoral students, and his answer was no.
Yeah,
Well,
he thought
okay,
there was an actual multiverse. But anyway, let's let Tim
I'd
jump
answer
on
it like this: God creates the one world in which he knows what will happen, but that I contend that leaves open multiple possibilities. And so the different coulds, there's still a bunch of coulds that are possible in non-deterministic worlds. But God just simply knows how free agents would freely choose. And so I would make that distinction. There's one world that God creates so he can ensure all that happens. That's why we can affirm a robust view of predestination and sovereignty and providence. But God can do that via middle knowledge, which actually leaves open the real possibility of you doing otherwise, even though God knows you won't do otherwise. So it's a difference between a could do otherwise and a would not do otherwise. So the difference between could and would distinction. I hope that answers your question. And Ben, you and I can, if we're done here, give me a call. We can keep this going.
Yeah.
I
Thanks,
love our
Ben.
interactions. Yeah.
Sorry you've had some trouble with your mic, but we appreciate you being on today. All right.
you,
And
Ben.
up next, we have Colton. I hope you're ready on the stage, Colton. Here's Colton Carlson. I know
Colton.
that face. And so what's your question or comment, Colton?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I'm a longtime fan of the show. So
Thanks.
even though I disagree with virtually everything you produce, I'm still a long
Of course you do.
Of course, right? I watch it all the time, so I appreciate you, all of you guys. My question has to do with a corollary argument that Stratton mentioned in his opening. He also mentions it in his book, is an argument for libertarian free will. All of you have somewhat posited this argument as an argument for libertarian free will, and that's the 1 Corinthians 10:13 argument. Mm-hmm. And so if you would indulge me, I know Stratton and I went back and forth many times before it. I still vehemently disagree, so hopefully we can get to the bottom, perhaps. My question is, why does the 1 Corinthians 10:13 argument necessarily entail a categorical ability to do otherwise? And how does that, how would that rule out, or sorry, how could, or how does, I guess, a dispositional ability how is a dispositional ability not compatible with the verse? So I guess if you answer affirmative in the former, then it will tail that my
Yeah.
last question will be false, but I'm still interested in why it must necessarily entail categorical ability. I don't see why it
Right.
has to entail categorical ability. I think that a dispositional ability is compatible with the verse, and I want to be very clear here. Okay, I don't think that the verse entails either or. I don't think that the verse entails a categorical. I don't think the verse entails a dispositional.
You think it's underdeterminative.
I think it's underdeterminative. Right. I think that, I think the verse is compatible with both. I think the verse is compatible with the categorical for sure. I think the verse probably entails some sort of metaphysical ability there. Maybe.
Yeah, that's where you lose me. I'm like, yeah, I can kind of go with everything you're saying up until maybe, and I'm like, it's never metaphysics. So I always lean.
Yeah. So
it has
think
to entail whatever is true, but it's not telling us which one is true. If that's your claim, fine with that, because I don't think I've ever made any sort of argument other than it's consistent with a libertarian view. I've read, I can't remember who wrote the journal article. There was a journal article from arguing that it entails compatibilism, but I've read, I don't know, thousands of journal articles.
Probably Stephen Cohen in 2011. He has one. He has an article that tries
where he argues that it makes the most sense given sanctification and all this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I disagree with that too. I think that,
but yeah, if that's the case, I just don't think that concern was metaphysics. But it entails whichever one's correct. So I guess.
Well, Jonathan, now I got to ask you: are you saying that we can't get metaphysical truth one way or the other through this passage?
I'm saying I'm saying it's consistent with whatever metaphysics are true. It's just I don't think that if you gun to my head, I think it seems like if you just presuppose libertarian free will, which I do, it's consistent with it and it makes the most sense. I think.
Okay, but Colton's asking, how does it necessarily entail it? Not just does it make the most sense? I think
I'm not going to make that claim either. Then,
all right,
because I don't.
Yes,
I
guess.
Necessarily does. I just think that it does. But if you're going to insert the word necessarily, I think I agree that this verse in particular doesn't necessarily entail that. But I'm open to be convinced. But like the article he just referenced, I wasn't convinced that it entailed compatibilism, and he thought it leaned that way. And I was like, no, that doesn't follow either. But I don't think I've ever made the argument that it necessarily entails that. But I do think that it's perfectly consistent with that, and it seems, in my mind, to make the most sense since I read it that way. But that's
okay. Sorry, just for the audience's sake, let me try to clarify something. And Colton and Tim, you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding this. So we're talking about the promise that if there is a temptation to sin, there will be a way of escape, right? And so the question is, okay, since the Calvinist affirms, the compatibilist Calvinist affirms determinism, the notion is that, look, this can't be a genuine promise to all people, because for some people God has not determined that they would take the way of escape, and so this seems to strike against Calvinism. But then comes along Colton and he says, hold on a second, there are two senses in which someone has ability to do something. In one of those senses, he couldn't do it even if he wanted to. So like the way of escape, it's as though I think Chris Tate used as an example in a discussion you guys had, like he's chained to the wall or something. He couldn't take the way of escape even if he wanted to. And in another sense, no, he could if he wanted to. And that's what matters there. Not in the ultimate sense, if this has all been decreed and determined. What matters is that if he had wanted to, he could take the way of escape. So he has that sense of ability. Now, am I understanding the concern properly? No.
I think a dispositional ability is qualitatively different than a conditional. I'm using a dispositional ability, which entails from Kadri Vavelen in 2013. She produced an amazing book towards leeway compatibilism for alternative possibilities, kind of a different view than the conditional. And a dispositional ability entails two types of abilities, which is a narrow and a wide. Tim Stratton has actually written a little bit about this on his Rejoinder to Bignon and other places in his blog. But a narrow ability is that I have what it takes, the know-how to do something. Like I know how to play guitar. Stratton knows how to play bass. right?
We can start a
Even if
band.
we're on the plane, we still retain this narrow ability to play the instrument. Okay. Or if I'm on a desert island, even though I don't have a computer in front of me, a keyboard, I still retain the ability to type in the keyboard, right?
Mhm.
Or write, even though I don't have a writing utensil. A wide ability then is the opportunity plus the narrow ability. So now I have a guitar actually in front of me. You guys don't see it on the wall, but I have my 2 guitars right here. I can actually play guitar for you. I won't, but I can play guitar for you right now because I have the opportunity technically to pick up the guitar and play, plus the narrow ability. So what I want to say is wholly apart from the conditional, the dispositional ability, that I have a certain intrinsic disposition to respond to temptation or to succumb to temptation. I have that technically still within the verse, like that the verse doesn't entail the falsity of that. Whereas obviously, if you say that the verse entails a categorical, since a categorical is necessarily incompatible with determinism, the dispositional ability being necessary, or not necessarily, but compatible with determinism. If the verse entails a categorical, that therefore means that the verse cannot entail a dispositional. But then I want to do the opposite, the modus tollens. If the verse is compatible with the dispositional, then that means the verse cannot be necessarily cannot entail a categorical. So what I want to say is that the verse is compatible with a dispositional ability, even if it doesn't entail a dispositional ability. I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
Okay. Tim, what's
Yeah.
your response to this?
Well, before we do anything, let me read the passage here. So 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no, well, I'm going to read 10:13 through 15. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape so that you may be able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. So I've argued that verse 15 also heavily implies libertarian freedom as well when it comes to rational judgments. But let's focus on 13. The context has everything seen. I mean, definitely, to Pritchard's point, I think we can make a strong case that this is the inference to the best explanation here. But I think we can go stronger and say that, well, here, let me read an argument that I have here in my notes, ready for this question. Premise 1, if Christians possess the opportunity to exercise an ability to choose between a range of at least 2 options, then they possess libertarian freedom. Let me restate that a little small in a shorter sentence. If Christians possess the opportunity to indeterministically choose between a range of options, then they possess libertarian freedom. And that would be by definition. 2, at the moment of temptation, Christians have the opportunity to choose either to give into temptation or to take the way of escape that God promises to provide. And 3, therefore, Christians possess libertarian freedom. So I'd say that if God is determining everything, what I refer to as exhaustive divine determination, then there is no opportunity to exercise an ability to take the way of escape. It's literally impossible for the human to, if God has determined them to sin, there is nothing they can do about it. It's metaphysically impossible for them
I
to.
totally agree.
Okay.
Let's say for the sake of argument.
Say that what?
I can agree for the sake of argument. What if indeterminism is true?
What if indeterminism is true?
If indeterminism is true, that doesn't necessitate libertarian free will.
Well, then
by
it's just
definition.
random. I think it would. And JP Moreland and I discussed this in our paper. If it's you've either got physical antecedent conditions determining everything, you got God determining everything, you've got completely random things going on that we have no control over, or you've got libertarian freedom where you're the source of some of your actions. So if it's not libertarian freedom, we haven't escaped any problems. We're still at the mercy then of random events that aren't grounded in us as first movers. So the only way to make sense of that passage then is if you have what it takes to take the way of escape, and you're not either determined by antecedent necessity or determined by randomness, which isn't rational, then there's nothing a rational agent can do to avoid the temptation.
If I can posit indeterminism all day long, Stratton, right?
You
So
can,
I can claim determinism.
Well, on indeterminism, you have either randomness or libertarian freedom. And libertarian freedom is rational, a rational agent, a mind as acting as the source. Randomness is like quantum mechanics.
Why though would it be random if I choose to maybe eat an extra piece of pie?
Did you make that choice? Were you the source of that choice? Or was that determined by, say, quantum physics?
Why can't I be the source of that choice if it's based on my own reasons?
If it's your own reasons, then you're exercising libertarian freedom.
How? Why? Why does it entail categorical?
If it's because you're the source at that point. And so
why does that entail a categorical ability?
I'm saying right now that if you're the source, and if you're the source, it seems that you're going to have the ability to choose to eat that pie or not. But let's
and a compatibilist can absolutely agree with that. You realize that though, right?
So compatibilism is a thesis that some kind of freedom and or rational or moral responsibility is compatible with determinism.
But
and so on that thesis,
require determinism to be true. Sure.
What's that?
You're right. I'm just saying it to be a little bit more specific. It doesn't require determinism.
I agree. Braxton and I have talked a lot about that, and I've got a whole new chapter in my forthcoming book on that. But it's the thesis that some kind of freedom other than libertarian freedom and or moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. So right now we're talking about eating food. So it's probably not going to be moral responsibility unless
if it's gluttony. So I'm thinking
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why I thought of pie holidays, but
right. Yeah, so it could be a moral issue as well. So if one has the opportunity to exercise the ability to refrain from the second piece of pie for dessert, that is, and they eat the pie, then that is libertarian freedom because they could have done otherwise. If it was determined by antecedent necessity, and they literally could not have refrained from the second piece of pie, then I would say that they're a victim of circumstances. So anyway, let me throw it back to you, Colton. Give me some clarity. I feel like, get me on the track. Give me on the specific question you want me to answer
here. So my specific question I want to answer is why can't the dispositional ability be compatible with the verse? I think, or I guess they're orthogonal. Why does the verse necessarily entail a categorical ability? I don't think it entails a categorical ability. I'm kind of with Pritchett. I think that the verse is compatible with both. I'm sort of agnostic. And I can fully grant that indeterminism is completely true in the entire thing. That's kind of the guiding question.
Okay. So, and Braxton and Jonathan, make sure I don't get off into the weeds here. So if it's determined, if you're determined to sin, then there is literally nothing you can do to take the way of escape.
Categorically, yes.
Categorically. And in that passage, it's saying that, I'll read it again. Where'd it go? Okay, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape so that you may be able to endure it. So if you can endure it, then that means that God hasn't determined you to do it, because if God's determined you to sin, then it is literally metaphysically impossible for you to take any kind of way of escape. It's impossible. So that's why I think it necessarily implies libertarian freedom, especially when we think of our own times of being tempted. I know from direct acquaintance and personal experience that when I am tempted to sin, I there's been times in my life where I'm tempted to sin. I'm aware of the way of escape, and I choose to sin anyway. And I am therefore I am guilty, and I deserve punishment and blame in those situations. I also know, and the longer I live and seem to have more victories, I'm aware of the temptation and the way of escape. And no matter how hard it is, I've chosen the way of escape. And I pray that in my sanctification, that I do that more and more. But if I am tempted to sin, and there's some kind of, there's a door that says exit, but it's locked and bolted, then even though it says exit, it's just a mere showpiece. It's not a real way of escape. So
and I can grant that it's not locked because indeterminism is true. So
if indeterminism is true, then I am not determined to sin. Then if I sin, then it's up to me, right? As the source. And if I'm the source and nothing is deterministically preventing me from doing otherwise, then I can actually do otherwise.
Yeah, and a compatibilist can say the same thing.
Is it the compatibilist who's affirming determinism?
No, a compatibilist who affirms indeterminism, because compatibilism is compatible with both indeterminism and determinism.
Okay, let's make this clear. So if we're saying that compatibilism is a thesis that some kind of freedom is compatible with determinism, and then you're saying, okay, but indeterminism is true, then what are we saying is compatible with indeterminism?
Compatibilism does not entail determinism, so it does not matter if it's true.
But compatibilism is the thesis. We're trying to figure out what is compatible with determinism. And now you're saying, well, okay, but I'm just talking about indeterminism. Yeah, so now it's like, okay, well, what have we been talking about?
If determinism were true, it wouldn't matter. I'm granting you, for the sake of argument, that it's not true, but then you keep kind of going back to, if determinism is true, who cares? Like, I can grant,
but that's what compatibilism is all about. Is compatibilism is the thesis that some kind of freedom is compatible with determinism. So that's what we're talking about. Even so, one doesn't have to be a determinist to affirm that.
Hey, Colton, let me say this. So are you saying basically like okay, a person might be an indeterminist, but maybe not for morally objectionable reasons. Maybe they just think that's the way the world is or something. But they could still say, if it were the case that a particular guy is determined, you find a guy like that who is determined, well, he's still morally culpable. Is that what you're saying? And if so, how does that help with the question of, are you trying to do like a reductio on the passage to say that like there are other ways this still wouldn't work? I mean, it seems like we're trying to figure out whether this is compatible, whether this passage is compatible with a deterministic understanding, theistic determinism. And so I'm not understanding the move you're making. You're saying, well, okay, I'll grant it to you, but you're not really granting it. You're granting it in the sense that the person you're positing has indeterminism, but he's still wanting to hold to compatibilism, which is what we're trying to get after.
It's not necessarily that I'm trying to, argue against the fact that the verse can't be understood deterministically. The verse could be understood. I can grant wholly that the verse cannot be understood deterministically. Whether or not I believe that's true, I can grant that for the sake of argument. So I think my main contention is, does the verse entail libertarian freedom?
Okay, I like this. I like that.
And I'm saying no, because there's other ways to understand the type of ability here that is completely compatible with that verse.
Yeah, I think for me, the question, because I actually hold the position, I'm the hypothetical person. So let me try to explain why maybe Colton will agree with this. Okay, it can be the case that whatever your under metaphysics are, compatibilism, terms, whatever, it can be the case that you were still not tempted beyond your ability, defined in a particular way. We could call that conditional ability.
I'd rather dispositional, but
sure. Okay, fine. It can still be the case that you weren't tempted because God is faithful. God also provided a way of escape, which you didn't take, which even if you presuppose libertarian freedom, anytime we sin, we didn't take it anyway. So I think what he's getting at is it could still be the case that the way of escape was there, and you were technically not tempted beyond what you could bear. You just didn't, even though you were determined not to. Is that what you're saying, Colton?
Yeah,
You're saying it could be the case that everything in that verse is true, even if you were determined to not take the way of escape. The way of escape existed. You just didn't take it, even though you were determined not to take it. It was still there, and even though you were not tempted beyond what you could bear, that could still be the case. You still sinned anyway, because whether you have libertarian freedom or dispositional ability, the outcomes could be identical in either scenario, right? That's
Yes.
what you're saying.
I
think
that there is a view that you can be indeterministic, that you can think that the whole world is indeterministic and still be a compatibilist. Namely, the type of free will, for instance, that you think is pertinent to moral responsibility is a dispositional ability, not a categorical. And so I think that view is logically consistent with, just has a logical space available for it. And I think that this verse doesn't rule it out. So I think you're right, Pritchett. I think that I can have the exact same outcome that the libertarian wants.
Let
okay,
me
carry the water for what you think is logically coherent. But yeah, I think I agree with you that all of that could be true. The issue for me is, what other questions does it raise, beyond the metaphysics of divine providence and human freedom? What does it say about the way the universe was designed, to where if you were determined not to take the way of escape? I think what Tim's getting at is, could that really be provided? I think the answer is yes. It's just superfluous.
Yeah, let's get back to Tim, but I just want to say, I think this needs to be said for clarity on our part. Maybe this seems inelegant to you, Colton, but as you know, the way I see this, it's if you are unchangeably determined not to do a particular thing, not to end up doing a particular thing, and that's because of things that happen outside of you, outside of the agent, then if the way that you were determined not to do it is because you were chained to a wall, or because you were determined through secondary causes not to have the disposition or whatever thing it is, then in my mind, in the ultimate, what I would call the ultimate sense, there was no way of escape. There may have been a way of escape in some sense, but there's not ultimately a way of escape. And I think you would agree that in the ultimate sense, whatever you're determined to do is what you're going to do. But and I guess I just said some stuff that you'll want to comment on when I meant to kick it back to Tim. So after you say whatever you're going to say, I'll kick it back to Tim.
I think that's true. And I could just say that, yes, I think the verse is compatible with that kind of interpretation. But I also think the verse is also compatible with what Pritchett is kind of saying. And what I'm trying to say is that, these words of sourcehood is ultimate sourcehood and just regular sourcehood, which a compatibilist is going to say. I think the verse is compatible with all of these different kinds of metaphysical notions. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly what the verse entails as it stands, which is my overarching point. Which then means, if you cannot pinpoint what the verse actually stands via it entails libertarian free will, then that means it's irrelevant whether or not it entails libertarian free will, because you can't get there. You don't have enough information to populate in that verse.
Right. But I think
wait, Pritchett, wait. Let's kick it back to Tim.
Well, I appreciate the clarification. So at this point, I would say, okay, I could, and I think I do make a very strong case that it's necessary for libertarian freedom, because if, as Colton has granted, the verse is incompatible with determinism, am I right? Did you grant that for argument?
Say that the verse is incompatible with determinism. I just said
you said it ruled it out. What?
That determinism is false.
Okay, let's say that this passage shows that determinism is false. I'm happy to start there. And if that's the case, and as JP Moreland and I demonstrated in our paper, then if determinism is false, you've got two other options. Randomness, think of quantum mechanics, or libertarian free thinking, which is what rational agents and moral agents do. So rational moral agents aren't determined or just do things randomly. So a rational agent
do it for their own reasons.
Well, reasons responsiveness isn't going to get you anywhere if that's determined. So if we're talking about an indeterministic view,
or reasons responsive indeterministic view.
I hold to a reasons responsive indeterministic view, and I say that it's the only way to make sense of that is if determinism is false. So Fisher and Revisa's hypothesis fails when it comes to rationality, and then I argue further that it fails when that comes to morality, because we don't hold irrational things morally responsible. But let's back up. If 1 Corinthians 10:13 rules out determinism, then you're left with either randomness or libertarian freedom, libertarian free thinking. And so now apply that to 1 Corinthians 10:13, and let's read it two different ways. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, random things will occur, and so it's possible for some people to not fall into temptation. But some people will randomly not do it. That is just an absurd way to interpret that passage. But if we read it through the libertarian, free-thinking, rational agent, and you say, no temptation is overtaken you that's not common to man, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. And that would include randomness, right? But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape so that you can do it. You can endure it. You can take the way of escape or not. And so it follows that when we do sin as Christians, well, we really could have done otherwise. And if that's the case, then that's the strongest sense of freedom possible, known as libertarian freedom.
Okay. With that, I'm going to let you make one final comment, Colton. We'll leave it with you, and then we'll move on, just because we do have some other people waiting. But thanks for coming on the show, and say whatever you'd like to say to sign off.
No, again, thanks for having me on. I just like to say that I think that what Dr. Stratton is unfortunately missing is that I don't think that the verse entails incompatibilism or entails determinism to be false. I never said that. I can just say for independent reasons that determinism is false, let's say, and that I am an indeterminist, but I don't think that the kind of free will at issue is incompatible with determinism. And so I think his whole spiel on randomness or sourcehood and libertarianism, and if determinism is true, therefore, is just misguided. I think that understanding.
But you haven't given us reasons to think that. You're saying this stuff, but I don't see any reasons to think that. But I know that was your final word, so
it's okay. He seems cool with it, and I'm cool with it. But we do have other people waiting.
So yeah, I think there is a fundamental disagreement on what I guess the strategy I'm trying to pose here. So maybe I wasn't clear, and if that was the case, I apologize. But nonetheless, I'll just leave it at that, and I appreciate for coming on. Thanks,
Colton. That was
Colton.
fun, and I'm glad to have you on for the first time on Trinity Radio, I think. So thanks for being on today.
Yeah, come back. I'll have you back.
Yeah,
because I had some follow-up questions. I had some follow-up questions for that, but maybe for another time.
We'll keep in touch.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
All right, see you, Colton.
Thanks, Colton.
Yeah, my issue with that verse, the way I get to libertarian free will, not necessarily from that particular text, but why I think it's most favorable to libertarian free will, is not that there can't be some possible way of escape, or that no matter how you define ability, you were just determined not to take that way. Okay, fine. Even if I grant all that, what I'm saying is I think the way of escape at that point, if determinism is true, because it was impossible to be taken, if you were determined to take it, it becomes superfluous, and it raises questions about the character of God, saying that this thing exists that you will never in any possible way take it. That's the issue for me, not necessarily that this text says anything.
Yeah. It just says that you are able to endure it, but if God
depends on how you define ability there, though.
Well, right. I mean, if it's
that was his point.
Pardon me?
I think his point depends on how you define ability in that text. And he granted our view for the sake of argument. And I think I agree with that. It just raises other questions about God.
Yeah.
It
and that's true. But ultimately, the most important thing here and I talk a lot about this in my forthcoming second edition of Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, is in this book, I try to be much more philosophically precise and define everything. And so I have an entire new chapter appendix on this, on defining what we mean by compatible, defining what we mean by determinism, by defining what we mean by libertarian action. And when you and here's the problem, and I discussed this, is, it was in the literature for a long time. Compatibilism simply meant you're talking about some kind of freedom being compatible with determinism.
Yeah.
But then more and more people started talking about using the definition that, we're not talking about freedom, we're talking about moral responsibility.
Yeah. And
Peter Van Inwagen is begging people to stop because the waters are getting muddy, but people continue to do it. So now, and I think it was Vivellen who Colton referenced. I think in what was it, Stanford Philosophical, in the Stanford Philosophy Dictionary, whatever. I think she wrote that, because basically the waters have gotten so muddy, now we have to understand compatibilism as either some kind of freedom and or moral responsibility. Those aren't her exact words.
Exactly how I say it. Compatibilism means determinism is compatible with some kind of freedom and or moral responsibility.
And what most of my work, though, is really focused on rational responsibility, not moral responsibility. And so, and I've argued forcefully that that rational responsibility is not compatible with determinism. And moreover, metaphysical and theological knowledge is not compatible with determinism.
We got a long line. We got a long line, but I'll just say this, folks. This is why some people would say in this realm, I presuppose an incompatibilism on this, just based on my intuitions. But the reality is, I think if in the ultimate sense, you can't, you have been determined not to take the way of escape, then you can't take the way of escape, whether you were determined not to in one way or the other. All right, let's first of all, thank you, Bilbers, for that super chat. Really appreciate that. Merry Christmas, fellas. Thanks for the work you've done, Tim. You and people like Eric Hernandez have done more than you can think of for the kingdom.
Amen.
Well, that's the person that Eric Hernandez is, the person that Pritchett says is the greatest living apologist. So there you go.
He's good.
All right, we're going now to Shane.
Tim's giving you a run for your money because Tim stands on with Maven. What weren't you standing on an air conditioning unit at one point?
Sharing the gospel to a bunch of high schoolers on an air conditioning unit with no microphone.
All right.
Love that picture, man.
All right. Shane, you finally made it. The rest of you, we will get to you. Stay with us. Thank you. And I'll just say, Shane, welcome to the show. And what is your statement or question?
Hey, I'm a longtime fan. Can you guys hear me good?
Yeah.
Hey, Shane.
All right, awesome. I've been a Molinist for a long time, so I'm just a fan. But I talk to a lot of people that aren't, and they have a lot of, objections that sometimes we get kind of to a dead end. So I just wanted to throw it to you, Tim, and see if you could help me here or kind of answer their objections. I guess one thing that William Lane Craig says a lot, or it comes down to it's only the circumstances that create an alternate decision. So is that different enough from the Calvinism, from the determinism? Like, is there other mechanisms? I know that you say that God creates the conditions and the agents kind of break that causal chain, but I guess how much control do the agents need until it's, until we're responsible, or until it's unjust for God to damn someone? You following kind of what I'm saying?
A lot of questions.
It's just the circumstances.
Yeah. So let's break this down and talking about these circumstances things, and then the being just to damn. So there's kind of two things there. So regarding the first, Dr. Craig and I have a slightly different view, I think, and I've never really talked to him about this. But I know he's been in the audience when I've read papers on this subject at the EPS a few years ago, and we had a great exchange afterwards. But I don't think we talked about this particular subject. But I don't take the view that God gets everything to happen by micromanaging each scenario and setting up the conditions so that we will choose in the manner that he knew that we would. Because I to me, that kind of looks like entrapment. Like what we'd get from the FBI or, going after drug dealers or whatever, which I think is still fine because you're, or especially going after, predators, going after little, little kids or whatever. I'm all for the FBI doing these sting operations. But if God just sets up every situation in detail, like a micromanager or a sting operation, I do think that runs into issues. But I don't take that view. And people make fun of me for doing this, but I've got to bring Dr. Strange into the conversation again, because I think a much better way of understanding Molinism is through the Dr. Strange analogy. Our colleague at Trinity, Chris State, got me this because I talk about Dr. Strange all the time. So, but a fantastic analogy, because Dr. Strange didn't try to set up all the details, including the gratuitous suffering of Star-Lord when he took 2 vicious knee strikes below the belt from Gamora. I mean, that's gratuitous violence, gratuitous suffering. But Dr. Strange didn't think, oh man, I've got to set things up to make sure that Gamora freely chooses to knee him below the belt. No, what did Dr. Strange do? He looked at the end game. He had the end game in mind. And what was the end game? It was the one feasible, freedom permitting world in which the evil of Thanos was ultimately defeated and all of the Avengers were raised from the dead. I mean, the Saints were raised from the dead. Where do they get that? To crush Thanos under their feet. He had the end game in mind. So again, it was the best feasible, freedom permitting end game where the evil of Thanos is defeated and the most possible Avengers are saved, and the 50% of the universe that was destroyed, all the life in it is raised again. So I say that, and I have an academic journal article on this. I think I referenced it earlier, that co-authored with Jacobus Erasmus. And we advanced the hypothesis that God created the one feasible, freedom permitting world in which he knew that the evil would ultimately be defeated and everybody who's not trans world damned is saved. So if that's the case, that's the best feasible permitting world. And I remember this now, I was talking about this, and Warren McGrew in the chat said, oh, is there only one feasible world then? Well, on my model, I'm saying, well, there's at least two, but there could be multitudes of tied for the best feasible worlds. If there are multiple worlds where everybody who's not trans world damned is saved. I'm going off into the deep, into the weeds again here. Let me back it up. Here's my point. I don't think God goes to set up all these individual circumstances to not to necessitate, but to ensure each of our choices. I think what he did was he picked the best feasible, or at least a tied for the best, as Kirk McGregor would say. But I advanced this possibility that there was one best, or how much I want to say. It would still be tied for there's still at least two on this world. On this model that I'm advancing, there's at least two feasible worlds where God exists as a triune being without creation, and then the one that's just as good as if he creates this world. Anyway, my point is God doesn't try to micromanage everything. Just like Dr. Strange didn't try to micromanage everything. He picked the best feasible, freedom permitting end game, and all the pain, evil, and suffering and possible damnations that occur they just come along for the ride, because they're all part of the world that ends the best. God has eternity in mind. And so this is how we answer the problem of evil. Now, before I answer your question about damnation, let me send it back to you. Am I answering the first part of your question or not?
Yeah, I think so. I was surprised, you were a little different from Dr. Craig on that. And maybe that's why I was getting caught up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're kind of saying it's not as particular and granular as maybe some people take Molinism, but a little more flexible. God's looking at the ultimate outcome, and whether or not Braxton or me or whoever makes this decision or that decision freely is not as relevant to God's choice. That might tie into the, he's not a, he doesn't, he's not favoring people or necessarily is just picking the outcome, and whether or not it's a feasible world where some arbitrary decisions get made, it doesn't really matter from God's case, from God's perspective.
Yeah, I think you're tracking with me. And with all that said, that's not to say that God can't do a sting operation from time to time. But I don't, just like Doctor Strange could have done that in the world that he actualized as well. But I don't think that this is the common way that God does things, and he knows what he even needs to allow Doctor Strange knew that he had to allow Tony Stark to sacrifice himself to get the best feasible. So we're talking about, this is also a great way to answer all the problems of evil, all the problems of suffering, all the problems of things we don't like in this world. I think Molinism really can answer all of those objections and questions. Do you want to transition to your question about damnation?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just an extension, but the people that I have the conversations with, they're kind of saying that Dr. Craig kind of talks about a soft determinism. All of our our where we're born, the language we speak, kind of all that's already kind of decided for us. And so I guess it's like they don't see it as any different from determinism. It's almost the same thing. I know that we say that there's a libertarian choice that the agent gets to make, but I guess just how far is it pushed where God is like completely in control versus where's there room for the person to actually make the decisions, because the circumstances, again, like Dr. Craig is saying, the circumstances like completely change the decision and determine whether or not a person makes a decision or not. Or circumstances don't determine, but that's the only thing that changes between A or not A is what the circumstances were.
So if you could sum that up in one question for me to answer, what would it be?
Sorry.
That's all
right. I guess how much control does God have over determining our circumstances before we're not responsible anymore?
Okay,
or
great question.
He's unjust to damn someone.
So I would say you lose responsibility if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate the entirety of your mental and physical actions. So God determines what world exists. Like when you look at the Kalam cosmological argument and the fine-tuning argument, those are both arguments that show causal determinism. When you say everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? God causally determined the universe to come into existence, and causally determined the fine-tuning and that guaranteed that our human life today could exist and would exist. So causal determinism. So there are many things that are determined. That's why I say just because I reject exhaustive divine determination doesn't mean I reject the idea that God ever determined some things. No, I say no, God determines a lot of things. There's just what gives us libertarian freedom is the fact that because we are, and this is a supernatural power, right? This isn't something that makes sense on on atheistic naturalism or robust naturalism, right? And this is actually a predictive power that, you could say that if Christianity is true, we would expect to be able to exercise libertarian freedom. But let me back up. Okay, I distracted myself.
Well, while you're thinking through that, Tim, let me take my stab at this and see how it does, because I think you and I have
now I'm never going to get it back, but go ahead.
I think you and I have a similar outlook, which is if we think it makes sense to say that God would if possible select the world of free creatures where all those who would have accepted Christ in any of the feasible worlds does accept Christ in the actual world. I think you're talking about your paper with Jacobus Erasmus or whatever, and those that are damned in the actual world are the ones that would have freely chosen not to accept Christ in any feasible world. Then you have two things going for you. In each world, you have actual free creatures, and in the actual world, you have the sort of best circumstances based on their free choices. And so I would say in that sense, you still have the freedom of the man intact, and you also have a merciful and benevolent God offering the best situation for salvation. Because I think the question, just throw it back to Tim, was how much does God, because God sets up the circumstances in some sense for where you were born, where you are, the language you speak, and all of those kind of things have influences on your choices. So how much of that is set up exterior to the person before they're no longer meaningfully in control?
Yeah, before they're so if we say antecedent, an event is determined if antecedent conditions are sufficient to necessitate that event. So if the entirety of my mental and physical actions are determined via antecedent necessity, whether it be God or mindless stuff, then I am not responsible for anything for what I think of, how I think about it, what I ultimately believe, and how my body moves. However, if antecedent conditions are insufficient to necessitate the entirety of my thoughts and actions, then I have freedom. That's where responsibility comes in. When the antecedent conditions are insufficient to necessitate all things about me, that means that I am an active agent. That's the supernatural power that humans have because we're created in the image and likeness of the creator of the universe, who has free will, libertarian free will, to choose to create or not to create, choose to fine tune in one way rather than another. An omnipotent God has to have libertarian freedom. Otherwise, he's unipotent. He's not omnipotent. He's unipotent. So think about this. The same omnipotent God that created us in his image and likeness. And that means that although that we're contingent upon him, we're contingent beings who can act as first movers, even though we're still heavily influenced by antecedent conditions all around us, right? These are heavy influences, but that's why 1 Corinthians 10:13 makes sense, right? These heavy influences screaming at you to sin, but God makes it possible. He gives a way so that you don't have to. I mean, it's just beautiful when you think about this bigger picture that because you are in the likeness of God, I mean, you are like God in the sense that you can choose to act as a first mover and say no to sin so you can avoid it. It's up to you to choose whether it's not random and it's not determined by something or someone else. No, it's determined by you. You are the determiner because antecedent conditions are insufficient to necessitate all things about you. So Shane, does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe one last comment or thought there, Shane.
Yeah, I do think it makes sense. I agree. it's just something odd or something that doesn't quite resonate with people. Like when you try to say that and they're like, well, there's a different set of circumstances or a very similar set, something could be slightly off. God can make it slightly so where you yourself still are choosing the other thing because the circumstances are a little different. And
and that's why I think the Doctor Strange model of Molinism makes the most sense, that the God chooses based on the end game, the eternal end game, as it were, and that's the best feasible create a world that he could create other than his static triune relationship apart from creation. Or even if you want to say it's one of the tied for the best. But if God chooses based on the end game, then all these, choosing one way, I mean, I'm still free at the moment when I chose to sin instead of taking the way of escape, or then the next day when I choose to take the way of escape instead of sin, because I'm actually a free agent who can learn from my mistakes. With that in mind, I think it makes much more sense, and Molinism starts to click for people. And that's why I just the Doctor Strange analogy. I make people, make my students watch Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame, and say, now look at what Doctor Strange did here. Did Tony Stark and Captain America lose their libertarian freedom? Did Doctor Strange somehow control Thanos's mind and his choices? No, he let all these free agents act as free agents. He just knew how the end game would turn out with all these free choices. And so Doctor Strange was sovereign over the entire thing in Endgame. He predestined the outcome and everything that happened, even though he didn't determine everything that happened. All he did was give Thanos the time stone.
That would have been better if he would have said they won in like 10,000 of them out of the however many million he looked at, than just saying there was only one possible.
Why?
That's where they blew it for me.
No.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Shane, thanks for being on the show today, man. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, I still think, guys, that the if you wanted, a lot of this can get really bizarre to people when you talk about possible worlds and peaceable worlds and all these types of freedom. That's why I think the church lady example is great. Just, do you think God knows if we hadn't had this conversation what we would be doing under other circumstances, and he can't be wrong about it? And the answer is usually with regular folks, well, yeah, he would know that. Now, okay, well, then that's middle knowledge. So now here's the next question. Do you think God would take that knowledge that he does have into consideration when he creates? It seems like he would. Okay, well, now we're Molinists, at least mere Molinists. Okay.
Like a rational thing to do.
Yeah. So, all right, the next one we have up here is Amateur Hour Apologetics or Apologist. Welcome to the show, and have at Tim right now.
What's up, brother?
So, perhaps I missed this earlier. I kind of got in a little late, but kind of just listening to a lot of your stuff on Free Thinking Ministries. I always was curious, like, what was your scriptural journey to Molinism? Like, where did you ground that scripturally to lead to that conclusion? Mm-hmm. If you don't mind sharing that. Maybe you shared it earlier. I just didn't hear it. So,
yeah. So, I mean, we got into this a little bit. I think 1 Corinthians 10:13 played a role, and Galatians 5:13 as well. Galatians 5:13. Let's see if I can remember it off the top of my head. Paul says something like this: "You are called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters." And we're like, okay, freedom. What kind? Is it libertarian freedom or compatibilistic freedom? He says, "You are called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your selfish, sinful desires. Instead, use your freedom to choose to serve one another in love." And so here, what's really cool is he's like, okay, you're called to live in freedom. What kind? And okay, well, then he says, now you can choose to satisfy your sinful fleshly desires. That's something you can do, or you can choose to serve one another in love. And so here we have another passage of scripture where we have alternative possibilities. And so in the same passage that Paul says you've got freedom and you're called to live in freedom, he gives alternative possibilities. So that's another reason to think libertarian freedom is true. Then you go back and you look at what Moses says. He's pleading with the Israelites in the Old Testament, and he says, look, I've given you, Moses is pleading with the Israelites, saying, look, God has given you choices here. He's given you life and death, blessings and curses. And then he says, now choose life. You don't have to die. You can live. And he goes on and describes that this is something that you can actually do. It's not like it's across the sea and you don't have access to it. Like it's not some illusion or some showpiece. No, this is here. You can do it. And so, I mean, I'm starting to understand at this point what libertarian freedom is, and then what determinism is. And I always said that I was an exhaustive divine determinist, that I believed not just that tulip was true, but that God determined everything. But then I started really pressing in on the implications of that. And I realized, well, that can't make sense of this scripture and that can't make sense of this scripture. But then I was like, but man, there's all this predestination stuff all over. And I was, a strong Calvinist at the time. And to this day, I still refer to myself as a Reformed theologian. And so I could not let go of this exhaustive predestination of all things. And for me, that journey was like, here, I've got some notes here. In the debate I had with James White, I kind of tried to put my journey into a case here in my opening speech. And I said, okay, I'm going to give 4 contentions here. And I said, contention number 1, the doctrine that humans occasionally possess libertarian freedom is supported by the biblical data. And so I've already talked about some of that. Then I went to contention number 2. Hold on a second. I got somewhere in my notes. All right. Contention number 2. The doctrine of divine predestination is supported by biblical data. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. All right. 1 Peter 1:2, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. All right. So God's got foreknowledge about these people. Isaiah 46:10, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand and I will do all that I please. So, it really seems like God is in control here. I've got all these Bible verses. I could just keep going and going on and on here. But in Ephesians 1:4, we read of something that happened prior to Genesis 1:1, that God chose us in Christ before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. And then Paul in Ephesians 1:11 says that everything is predestined according to his purpose, who works all things after the counsel of his will. So, it's just on and on and on. It just seemed really hard to get away from the idea of predestination. But this brings me to the next contention. And since we've already got biblical data that supports the idea of libertarian freedom, then we have to realize that, logically speaking, it's impossible to determine a libertarian free choice. So again, contention number 3, it is logically impossible to determine a libertarian free choice. And finally, then this brings us to contention number 4, then middle knowledge is the only way to predestine a libertarian free choice. So there are 2 ways to predestine things for God. One is via determinism, but if determinism is true, then libertarian freedom is impossible. There cannot be a libertarian agent in existence if God determines everything by definition. So, last contention of middle knowledge is the only way to predestine a libertarian free choice. So for me, it just seems like, my voyage to Molinism started with a commitment to Reformed theology, really. And because I think it's biblical that God predestines and is sovereign over all things, and that he is in control in a robust sense, but not a deterministic sense. Because once one understands the definition of what it means to be determined, then all responsibility goes out the window. And when I really started seeing that rational responsibility was incompatible with determinism, that just sealed the deal for me. And that was back in probably.
Tim, it sounds like what you're saying is, rather than just going to texts that we've heard in the past from Molinists that seem to imply that God knows what would have happened under other circumstances, which would kind of be like the fast lane to get there, you're saying, fine, you don't like those? Here, I think the Bible says this about predestination. I think it says this about libertarian freedom indirectly. And so as a result, what you get is a framework that makes sense of that, Molinism.
Yeah, and I don't see any other view that can make sense of all that data. That's why I say in my debate with James White, I said that Molinism was the only way to predestine a libertarian free choice.
Amateur Hour, you have any follow-up there, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of asked the easy question. I've been new to apologetics compared to y'all for a couple of years, just working with Rasho Christie and all. And it's just like I get these questions sometimes, and yeah, it's great to listen to you and Tim, but I also like to kind of do my own study and my own research and just figuring these things out.
Oh, that's the way to do it.
And I too have always struggled with determinism, because I'm kind of in agreement with Eric here. My friend Eric Hernandez, we were talking before, and I listened to his stuff, and I'm like, the problem with determinism with me is like I almost feel like I can't trust my own reasoning faculties. Then
You can't.
like, yeah, it's just like, okay, but then if I can't trust my own reasoning faculties, then how do I even know that I can be saved in the first place?
You can't.
Yeah. And so I had problems with that, but we have verses where we're told, for call upon the name of the Lord, believe Christ rose from the dead, you shall be saved. But then okay, but if I'm determined, and even if I am determined to think I believe that, how do I know that I actually know that? Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Oh, well, okay. First of all, I got to ask you this, Amateur Hour apologist. Do we know each other? Because I don't know who you are in this discussion.
We have a lot of mutual friends, but we do not know each other personally at this time.
Okay.
We work with a lot of the same people.
Okay.
I will say that.
Well,
especially
I'm a fan of what you do on social media.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know if I knew you or not. But you're just
well, we do have a mutual atheist friend that we both hung out with and tolerate occasionally. So
I'll bet he's in the chat. I bet he's ready to come up next, actually.
Yeah. He lost a pull-up contest not too long ago to Sean McDowell. So, I can't let that go.
Let me give you this. This is an argument that I've been advancing recently. So premise one, no theological belief is justified if it can be fully explained as the result of untrustworthy antecedent conditions. 2, if exhaustive divine determination, is true, then all theological beliefs can be fully explained as the result of untrustworthy antecedent conditions, namely a deity of deception. 3, therefore, if is true, then no theological belief is justified. 4, is a theological belief. 5, therefore, a belief that is true is not justified. But now this is going to have horrible ramifications on everything else as well, because the third step of this argument was, therefore, if is true, then no theological belief is justified. What are some other theological beliefs? Oh, that the Bible is trustworthy. That's not justified anymore. Oh, I've got the assurance of salvation. Not anymore, you don't. So this is epistemic meltdown. Once somebody affirms that God determines all things, and since there is no such thing as a super pope in existence who has a perfect set of theological beliefs, Pritchett's close. Hey, you're close. You're probably the top, but you're not quite there yet. There's no super pope, so that means that every mature Christian and theologian and pastor and Sunday school teacher affirms at least one, if not multitudes, of false theological beliefs. And if exhaustive divine determination is true, then that means that God determines all of his followers and everybody else to affirm false theological beliefs. That makes God into a deity of deception. And then you're going to say, and a deity of deception inspired scripture. Therefore, you don't have a reason to trust anything in it, including the same passages of scripture that you're using to reach Calvinism or determinism or anything else. This is what I refer to as epistemic meltdown. The whole thing falls apart.
Hallelujah.
Right. And I remember Eric, he had that discussion with that rapper guy not too long ago, and the kind of discussion was in that realm of being able to really, I mean, essentially, if determinism true, you can't know anything really, essentially.
I like Eric and I. That was a good discussion.
Eric and I are cut out of the same cloth. We're like really close friends, and we just about agree on almost everything. And I just love that guy. He sharpened me like iron, even more than Braxton or Jonathan. That's saying a lot.
Well, thanks, Amateur Hour. I sure appreciate you being on today, and thanks for watching our stuff.
Yeah, thanks, brother.
Peace out.
All right. And thank you guys for waiting in the backstage. I really appreciate that. I'm going to bring in the fallen ape theist.
Yes.
This is, I think, the very man referred to by the amateur hour apologist, and who is a friend to all of us. And he's been on the show, just me and him talking before, but so glad to have you here, Richard. I hope I can use your name, Richard.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'm not a secret identity like the amateur hour apologist is.
Yeah.
right.
You're like Tony Stark. You're willing to tell everybody who you really are.
I am Iron Man. That's correct.
You lost a pull-up contest to Josh McDowell?
Well, if I had lost to Josh McDowell, then God help me. But I did lose to Sean McDowell.
Oh yeah, whatever. How many pull-ups can you do?
You said God help me. We caught him.
I'm in. I inadvertently just joined. I on that particular day I did 13 and he did 15.
Oh, really? So what's your current weight?
I'm probably right at 200 right now.
Okay, Sean McDowell doesn't weigh 200. So.
No, he's like 160 and he's ripped. He's and you don't see it until he takes off his jacket, but he is ripped. So
okay, I don't count that a loss. See, I'll if you and I ever do a pull-up contest, I will add 25-pound weight.
Oh.
In order to even it out. Because that's the only real way to do it.
Nice. And also, I don't think either of us were prepared. We just always knew that one day we would try it. And on the day that we were together and we had a chance, neither of us were really ready. But he still beat me. Sure as heck.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. I've just got a real quick question. And then, you can take me off and let Dr. Stratton handle it from there. But I'm thinking about James White specifically. In his mind, he's got it figured out. And I'm not saying he's narcissistic or unwilling to concede that he could be somewhat wrong. But in his mind, he's got it all figured out. And I'm wondering, does the Holy Spirit or Jesus or God or all three of them or one, whatever, is there any tension on their end where they're like, but he's wrong? In fact, let's just say that Christianity is true and Tim Stratton has it figured out and James White is wrong. And everyone that he's misleading, they're all wrong too. Is there any tension there from above? Are they like, man, what can we do? Or is this exactly what they want? Or is what's going on in their mind? And you can let Tim Stratton take it from here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard. That's a great question. And it's really, it's related to how I answered the last question, but let's, if James White says that he knows that exhaustive divine determination or Ed Calvinism is true, if he says, I know this, well, at that point, given the argument that I just gave, let me read it again. Premise one, no theological belief is justified if it can be fully explained as the result of untrustworthy antecedent conditions. Two, if Ed Calvinism is true, then all theological beliefs can be fully explained as the result of an untrustworthy antecedent condition, namely a deity of deception who determines all Christians and everybody else to get theology wrong, at least on occasion, right? And then three, therefore, if Ed is true, then no theological belief is justified. Four, Ed Calvinism is a theological belief. Five, therefore, a belief that Ed Calvinism is true is not justified. Now, here's the thing. Knowledge is defined as justified true belief. And so if you don't have a justified belief, then it's not knowledge by definition. So James White can say, oh, I know that Ed Calvinism is true. Well, then at that point I say, well, that's just noise because you don't have a justified belief because of this undercutting defeater. Defeaters erase justification. And so my arguments show how justification for determinism is erased. So now here's the thing. I will say, well, it could be true, but you could never know it. You could never possess knowledge of it. And then we're going to get into a lot of absurdity. So I see what Josh Klein is saying there. Distracting me, Josh. But yeah, so I would say then James White, given his position of what he says he believes, cannot know it. Even if his position were true, he could not know it by definition. However, if Molinism is true, or really any view that allows libertarian free thinking, then we would expect even Christians who are filled with the Holy Spirit to occasionally make mistakes or be lazy thinkers, not bracket their biases or consider their emotional attachment to certain views, and maybe they aren't doing their due diligence. This is all things that libertarian agents can, I can choose to be more careful while I'm thinking things through. So that's why I think we have a disagreement among epistemic peers, and even among Christians who are regenerate and saved, which, Richard, I think someday you're going to be one of those guys. But in the meantime, that's how I explain our epistemic disagreements on things. But if it's all determined, then our disagreements are determined by antecedent conditions. It's not up to us, and everything falls apart.
Yeah, it makes sense to me that free will is a good explanation for why we have these different beliefs, because in the history of thought and in the history of Christian thought, some people have, like you said, not been careful enough. Others have intentionally tried to deceive. Others, weren't diligent enough in their study. There could be all kinds of reasons why we end up with these different views. So I think that James White genuinely believes what he's saying, and I think that he really believes that it's true, and thinks he's standing on the word of God.
Yep, I agree.
Good to see you, Richard. Thanks so much for being here.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah,
you too.
Merry Christmas. Oh, he's got to be a Christian. He said Merry Christmas.
He said there's so many indicators here, and he just showed us his wife, who I'm sure wants him to be a Christian.
Oh, yeah, she's awesome.
Tim, here's what I like to say about that, though. If you're wrong, you're wrong by the decree of God for his eternal glory. If
That's
James
right.
White is wrong, he screwed that up all by himself.
That's right.
That's
right.
I mean,
Great point.
Yeah. Well, okay. So now we have the Emmaus Highway, and I'm trying to get through all of you guys while we still have time with Tim here. And so we may have to make these somewhat briefer, but I know you've waited so long. Welcome to the show, Emmaus.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
All right. I want to preface by saying that I greatly appreciate finally being able to talk with you guys. Doctors Hunter and Stratton have been massive influences on my thinking, especially Dr. Stratton. I have learned at your feet in ways that you do not even know.
Wow.
Amen.
Do I know who you are?
No, we have never met.
Okay, you're another superhero
Maybe.
with a secret identity. No.
Maybe I haven't posed my questions yet. I want to say that because I'm not going to pull any punches here. But
throw them hard, man.
Yeah, throw them hard.
Yeah.
But you, Dr. Stratton, happen to be the man that convinced me of the truth of open theism.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, hey, I'll just say this: I'm fine with that, because I do think it's a preferable view, at least nuanced and defined, correctly. I think it's a better view than exhaustive divine determinism. And so I've always said, look, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but although I really seek to affirm a robust view of predestination, the problems that come along with rejecting libertarian freedom and libertarian free thinking and rationality, which leads to you can't even trust the Bible or have assurance of salvation or anything like that. I would much rather you be an open theist than an exhaustive divine determinist. So I'm all right with that.
All right. Given your arguments against open theism, though, I think that you've only left a firm affirmation of some sort of exhaustive determinism open to you. I don't think that true libertarianism is available to you without accidentally contradicting your own beliefs.
All right, let's hear why.
So first, I'm going to describe something here. I want you to find out if you agree with this. So,
Okay.
Would you say that truth values are ungrounded, eternal in the sense of being timeless, and immutable? They cannot be changed.
Okay, I've never said it like that. I'm going to say that all propositions have a truth value. Any proposition is either true or false based on the law of excluded middle.
Well, that's technically incorrect. You're presupposing bivalence, but that's fine. I hold the bivalence too. I just want to acknowledge that technically you're not violating the law of the excluded middle if you would say that that certain statements do not have truth values.
Well, I'd say any statement is true or false.
That's
So
bivalence.
well,
So
okay,
again,
but
I can assume that for the purpose of this. I'm just saying for the people at home that are watching this, there technically is a third. There's a third position that you could take if you wanted to,
and that is that future tense propositions regarding libertarian free creatures don't have truth values.
But that's not mine. That's not my personal view. I happen to be a bivalentist myself.
Right. Now, I would say that's an assertion and an assumption that can never be proven, and I think it's ad hoc, and I think it's unbiblical. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to reject the idea that future tense propositions about libertarian creatures don't have truth values.
Okay, but you agreed with truth values as I described them, that they are ungrounded, eternal in the sense of being timeless, and immutable. They cannot be changed.
Well, it's going to depend. I'm just going to keep my definition and let you unpack things here. But, do you want me to respond to the grounding objection?
Well, no, because
is that where you're going? Okay.
It is fine. It would be fine to say that they're ungrounded if they change. It would also be fine if they were not eternal.
Okay, I'm just going to say
became true. If something became true, it would be fine if it was ungrounded. My thing is that, do you affirm that they are those three things?
I reject the idea that every truth must be grounded in a concrete entity that metaphysically explains why it's true.
Okay.
And I've shown that in my book. I've offered multiple.
So you agree it's ungrounded, but do you agree that they are eternal and unchangeable?
A proposition would be like, give me a proposition that you might have in mind, and let's evaluate it.
Logically, prior to the creative act, God will create the best feasible world.
Okay, that is.
So the statement is, God will create the best feasible world. We're talking about if we were prior to, logically or temporally, prior to the creative act.
Okay, logically, God knows that everything he could create and everything.
Knowledge isn't involved in this argument. This is about truth value.
You said logically prior, so that gets us into.
Because I'm not wanting to get bogged down in philosophy of time. So
okay.
Before, but without getting into what is meant by before.
Everything after the God's creative decree, this is going to apply to.
Okay.
So to pick
prior to the decree, these truth values were indeterminate. They didn't exist.
What truth value, like that
God would create?
Okay, that God. Okay, so natural knowledge. Since we're talking about this logical moments here, and we're going to talk about the propositions that God knows the truth value to. So in God in his timeless sans creation state, God knows everything he could create. He also knows that if he creates free creatures, what they would do. Then you have the creative decree, and from that point on, God knows everything that will occur. So I'm talking about every proposition that's post decree.
So you're saying that the truth values do not become settled, like they don't come into existence until the creative act.
The decree, it's God's decision about what world will come into existence and what will. And
I'm trying to establish if you can actually defend the libertarian freedom of God here.
Oh, sure, because the decree is not determined by something outside of God. It's God is the source of his choice.
So that would require you to say that these truth values did not exist prior to the creative act, which is odd because of other things you've said about open theism. But I'm less interested in that about the truth values. So we've established that they became settled at the creative act. Okay,
but then I have to say, well, what do you mean by settled? That word
they can't change.
Well, I'm going to reject that then.
Won't change, maybe.
Yeah. I reject.
I'm trying to get you pinned down on saying that these truth values are immutable, that they cannot change.
Okay, well, I don't want to try to
a statement said today, that is true will remain true forever, or whenever it is that it gained this truth value, it will always be true. It will never be false, and vice versa. A false statement will never be true.
Right. I'm
Okay.
I'm having a hard time tracking everything you're saying, but
So-
yeah, I'm saying that once God decrees, it is true that Emmaus Highway will call into the show. Like, so it was true prior. Once God chooses to create this world, prior to your existence, it's true that Emmaus Highway, the proposition Emmaus Highway will call into Trinity Radio on this date was either true or false.
Okay.
God knew it was true.
Assuming it was true since I'm here, that the Emmaus Highway would call into the the radio show on Christmas Adam. Was it possible for me to do otherwise?
Yes.
How? It was
Because
true. It was a true statement. How was
Right.
how is it that I'm able to beat the truth value?
Because truth values, if they exist at all, are abstract objects, and abstract objects are causally effete by definition. They don't cause you to do anything. And so you
so then,
are there is
so then they're not-
let me finish,
so then
please.
they're
Let me
non-existent.
finish,
Hold on,
finish,
Emmaus.
let
Let
me
him finish the thought.
Right. Right. So there's nothing that actually exists that stands in a causal relation that would deterministically prevent you from doing otherwise. And so if there's nothing that actually exists that deterministically prevents you from doing otherwise, then you are the source and you can do otherwise, even if God knows you won't.
The logical entailment of that, Dr. Stratton, is that the truth value for that statement was indeterminate prior to me calling in.
Truth values don't make you do things. Like I said, they're causally.
What's the purpose of them? Then they don't exist. Like then it doesn't matter. Like it's all smoke and mirrors.
No, it's not. It's not smoke and mirrors. It's just true. But truth values don't cause things to happen.
Yeah, let me take a stab at an actual example that might help a little bit. So, I use this one a lot. So Peter's going to deny Christ. Jesus says that Peter's going to deny Christ. God knew from eternity that Peter was going to deny Christ. Does that mean that
sure?
after that Peter had to deny Christ?
I do not grant your presuppositions. I don't think it was true from eternity that Peter was going to deny Christ.
Well, I know you don't. I'm explaining.
I think that Peter was free, that he could have actually affirmed Christ.
Right.
but-
Emmaus, hold on. I'm just explaining to you how we see it, okay? Because you're asking about our position. So, here's what I'm saying. Yes, Peter could have chosen otherwise. It's just that if he did, then God would have known differently. The truth value would have been otherwise, and Jesus.
I haven't brought up God's knowledge. I'm asking about truth values.
Yeah.
Okay. So the statement then, let's say, I don't know, during the time of the first Israelite kingdom, the statement then, Simon Peter will deny Christ 3 times. Was that true or false?
It depends on whether Peter did deny Christ 3 times or not.
So you're saying that at that time, that statement had an indeterminate truth value?
Nope. I'm saying that what Peter did is what God knows from eternity.
Yeah. The proposition, Peter will deny Christ 3 times before the rooster crows on that particular date. That proposition has a truth value, I contend, of true. It's either true or false. Jesus knew it, and it seems to be much more than just, oh, well, Peter has a Jesus denying nature today, so Jesus could know that. No, because
that's not how I interpret that. I interpret that as Jesus knew that Peter was in trouble. I mean, he literally says that the devil had been asking to sift him as wheat, and that he warns Peter that that's what he's going to do if he doesn't change his ways.
3 times. How does he know that? Especially when
was it 3 or 1? It depends on the gospel. But let's just say it was 3, and he knows that the and assuming that he's actually even talking about a literal rooster crowing, there's some question about whether that's an idiom about a certain time of night. But even if we grant that that's about a literal rooster crowing, God is able to make roosters crow.
Okay, that's irrelevant. Sure, he can make roosters crows, but are we gonna? If Peter was free and not determined to deny Christ 3 times, then it's odd that Jesus would know this with detailed specificity, that Peter, not only are you in danger of denying me, but you're going to do it 3 times in a short window of time. And that involves 3 different sets of libertarian agents throughout that window of period. So that kind of detailed specificity doesn't make, it gets so ad hoc if you're going to try to make that work.
You're after the event looking backward, presupposing that it was all blueprinted, and that's fallacious.
I didn't say anything about a blueprint.
Yeah, and Emmaus, I'm noticing something happening here that really needs to be pointed out. So hold on for just a second, which is you're bringing a challenge to our position on this, or Tim's position, I should say, but it's also my position. You're bringing what you think is a defeater for that. And then so when we start to say, here's why it's not a defeater, you say, yeah, but I don't see it that way. Well, I know you don't see it that way, but we're telling you why we don't think your challenge penetrates our view. So right now, we've gotten off on a side topic where what we're doing is we're trying to argue about whether your explanation of Peter makes as much sense as our explanation, when really all we're trying to do is show you that your criticism doesn't impact our explanation.
Dr. Hunter, are you sure that you have the exact same position as Dr. Stratton? I was in the impression you had a slightly different view.
I don't use Molinism for much of anything when it comes to the Calvinism discussions, but I do count myself a Molinist.
Yeah, but there's different kinds of Molinism.
Yes, and Tim and I probably do disagree on some things, like we disagree on some nuances of predestination. But as for how we're addressing this particular issue, I think we're on board.
Yeah, I'll just say this, that ultimately Scripture gives us reason to think that there are truth values to future tense propositions regarding libertarian agents, either, and I've written about this, it's either with detailed specificity or regarding great distances of time. So think about detailed and distances of time. So like regarding Cyrus, God knew that a guy named Cyrus would be born. Now, are we going to say that God started making all of, that
Dr. Stratton, do you believe that God can name people?
Let me finish my talks here. You keep interrupting me. So let me finish this. So unless we're going to say that, because this prophecy was given 200 years before King Cyrus fulfilled the prophecy, roughly 150 years before he was even born. So that would mean either that there's these truth values that God possessed knowledge of, that had a true or false, or that God determined everybody to procreate that led to Cyrus's existence, determined them to name him Cyrus, then determined all the evil that was going on that Cyrus was involved in. So this becomes much bigger than just determining or having a truth, knowing a truth value regarding one person's existence. This is involving a whole slew of hosts of people over 200 years that included all their sin. So if you're going to say, well, no, and I know a lot of open theists do this, I don't know if you're going to do it, but a lot of them say, well, God does determine some things. Well, if you're going to start saying that God determines these sins and determines Peter's sins, let alone the people who were confronting Peter that night, so he could guarantee the 3 times. If you're going to say that God's starting to determine sin, then just be a Calvinist.
You finished? Are you finished, Dr. Stratton?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The amount of time between a prophecy and the fulfillment of the prophecy is irrelevant, because God is powerful enough to bring about his prophecy if he so chooses. So sometimes he doesn't.
And that's my point.
And specifically, your critique has some presuppositions that I do not grant. Like, you are presupposing traducianism. I happen to be a soul creationist.
That's irrelevant. I work with Joshua Ryan Ferris. He's a creationist.
Then it doesn't matter how many generations there are in between the prophecy and Cyrus. Cyrus will still be himself, regardless of who his parents are.
And all the sinners that he's dealing with?
We'll just be dealing with a different bunch of sinners. Like you're presupposing traducianism.
No, I'm not, because
that has nothing to do.
Then it doesn't. Then it's not relevant to proving what you're appealing to Cyrus. What you're appealing to isn't relevant to the question at hand.
Okay, what does traducianism have to do with the hosts of all the sinners who are sinning that lead up to that point in time, 200 years later? And what's actually going on 200 years later, all that sin where Cyrus has to step in and act.
Tradition
What does
isn't
Confucianism
posits.
have to do
In
with
order
any
for
of
you to
that?
be yourself, you have to have the exact ancestry that you have.
Okay,
So,
let's suppose then that God created Cyrus ex nihilo. What does that have to do with any other point that I made regarding all these other sinners? Or does God determine the sin, or is it
sin
is
is
it
in the
freedom?
world because
Hold
it
on.
entered in through the devil and Adam.
What?
You asked me about the origins of sin. Sin entered the world through because of the
Okay.
devil tempting Adam and Eve, and then Adam
Hey.
willfully sinned.
This doesn't make sense anymore.
We might have to have another call-in show on open theism specifically, and
Right.
maybe we'll bring
Well,
on.
I have one more
my
question
open theist
for
friends.
Dr. Hunter because he brought up that he thought that he has the same position as Dr. Stratton. Dr. Hunter, do you believe that God can know what irrational objects like square circles and one-ended sticks look like?
No.
That's surprising. I could not articulate your position if I tried.
All right. Thanks for being on the show today, Emmaus. Okay. All right. Next up, we have Exegeting Calvinism. Thank you for being here today, Exegeting Calvinism.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I was going to ask some scriptural questions, and I do want to get to those. But you made a point about Dr. Strange, that
Yeah.
you said that Dr. Strange, in looking through history, saw. I believe I understood. He saw one path of either a series of decisions or a series and a group of decisions that led necessarily to Tony Stark snapping his fingers.
No.
And there's not a string of decisions that
Not the lead necessarily. No, I reject that view.
Okay, so okay, I guess that's something that I didn't want to get into that, but I was kind of understanding that because the whole idea of Dr. Strange looking at 14 million futures was not to create a sense of determinism, but to create a sense of dread that we're going to try to do this, but there's only one chance out of 14 million that we're going to actually accomplish it. And I'm not sure even Dr. Strange knew that it was going to come about. He just knew what his role was going to be. So
yeah, if you don't mind, let me before you ask.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. This is what I find so beautiful about that cinematic moment was because it was the way it was presented, as you noted. I'll never forget watching it on opening night, and you could just hear in the theater back when movies were still awesome, the entire packed theater just go, oh, because everybody thought 1 out of 14,605,000 is horrible odds. It's mathematically impossible. There's no way. And that's how everybody took it. My son, who was a freshman in high school at the time, leans over to me and goes, Dad, is this Molinism? He actually caught it before I did. So proud of him. And I was like, yeah, it is. And if you want to go back and you can look at the blog I wrote that night in 2018, I went home and I typed it all out. And I said, this is what's going to happen in 1 year. Make sure to come back. And then go look at what I wrote in 2019. And I wrote this a blog that night when Endgame came out. And I basically was like, see, I told you it wasn't about the odds. It was about the power that Dr. Strange had to actualize that one world out of the 14,605,000.
Okay. All right.
And so he did. And when Dr. Strange is about to die, which is awesome that he actually sacrificed his life and then he is raised from the dead. But as he's about to die, Tony Stark says to him, why'd you do that? Why'd you give him the stone? And he's like, it was the only way. And then he goes to dust. So I would say, yeah, Dr. Strange knew exactly what he was doing because it wasn't about the odds or the chances. It was about his power to pick that one world and actualize it.
Okay. All right. I get it. All right.
Cool.
Anyway, have your book.
All right.
Just wanted to note that. Reading in the section on determinism, I kind of want to go quickly through the passages that you have here that say that theological determinism is biblical. Okay. So
now just for clarity, so you're in the second chapter, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm talking about why. What I'm trying to communicate there is why was I a determinist for all those years?
Okay.
And I'm like, these are the verses that really persuaded me to say, well, I think that God determines everything. So with that clarification in mind, go ahead.
Okay, but isn't that part of part of the the chapter is basically that you're laying out that libertarian free will is true and that God in some way determines all things is true as well. Am I missing that? Because
Yeah, you're
that's the
missing it.
sense that I got from the point that, okay, so you're just saying that theologically, you're just saying that Molinism, God doesn't determine things.
All things. He does determine some things.
Okay.
Mhm.
So is it, okay, so then I guess I misunderstood the point, because it sounded to me like you were laying out a case for why is Molinism necessary? Because if you throw determinism out, you can just be an open theist. I mean, then you don't need all the sophisticated everything that happens with Molinism.
Yeah,
You
what
can
I'm
just say
trying.
open theism. So it's
Yeah.
that's why I understood, because really Molinism to me is kind of a philosophical compatibilism, and you say that it's clear that God is determining events, to happen a particular way throughout history. And it's also clear that we have free will, so we have to find a way to make those two things work together. But if you don't say God is determining at least sort of the core of the path of what's happening, then we could just be open theists.
Well, let me just say something to help. To say that God determines something to happen is not to say that God deterministically brings that thing to happen about.
Right. That's fine.
I mean, I'm
that's
a
why
big
I'm trying to.
big stickler on
Go ahead.
definitions. So, if somebody says, "Oh, well, does God deterministically?" How did you say it? Exegeting Calvinism
Determines all things, or
yeah.
determines,
So I reject that. I reject that. I say, no, God does not determine all things, but He does predestine all things. And then I know the difference, the philosophical difference between what it means to determine something by definition, and then how else can God predestine something without determining.
Okay,
and so that's
when you were talking to Emmaus, you listed Isaiah 46 and I believe Psalm 115, and you listed Ephesians 1:11. And so and basically the timeline then is predestined by God, you're saying.
Yes. Oh yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So can we go through those and see if they say that God predestines all things?
Well, I agree that He does.
Okay, well, I don't agree that He does, and I don't think these passages support that.
Oh, are you not a Calvinist?
I'm not a Calvinist.
Oh, when you said exegeting Calvinism, I assumed. So sorry.
No, yeah, my whole thing with Calvinism is like, Calvinism falls apart when you exegete their proof texts.
Oh, I agree.
And so I go through. Actually, I just finished recording this series on the Westminster Confession, reading every text and every proof text that they cited to see if the text really say what
cool.
Westminster Confession says. So
hey,
go over and check that out. But anyway,
I got to ask something crazy for a live stream. Can you three talk for just a minute or two while I run to the restroom?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, cool.
Totally.
I'll be right back.
Hey, Pritchett can talk. Pritchett can talk infinitely, but yes, we'll make sure Dr. Stratton gets to your questions, since I know you really want to talk to him. You've got his book and everything. And by the way, for anyone that's listening, you should know that that Dr. Stratton's book on Molinism, which is coming out with a second edition, but the current edition is available in the description. You can click a link there, or you can just go to Amazon and search his name and you'll find it. There's also a workbook that's really handy that goes with it if you want to teach this in a group or something. So go ahead, exegeting.
I was surprised to hear Dr. Stratton say that God doesn't even, I guess, predestine. I mean, he said God predestines all things, but then he said things that aren't relevant to the eternal purpose, He may not even determine those things. Like, things that are happening in outer Mongolia presently that aren't going to have an effect on whether Christ returns and saves the elect. Is God still, is He still predestining those things? I mean, it sounded to me like He isn't. So,
well, if God actualizes a world, then all things that occur in that world are in some sense predestined. But what I think he's saying is, when he was taking a kind of a different view from William Lane Craig, God didn't need to account whether I used Crest or Colgate this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't need to arrange with specificity that His ultimate plan would only obtain in the world that He actualized if I used Colgate this morning instead of Crest. So I think he's saying he doesn't need William Lane Craig's view of
God meticulously determining every circumstance. Okay.
Well, not determining, but arranging the circumstances.
So then God is predestining the things that are essential to the eternal plan that He has, and then other stuff that happens just kind of falls out of that. Is that accurate?
Well,
Like, you're going to be, you're part of the eternal plan, and that you help preach the gospel and to further God's process in his kingdom. So there are things that God has predestined about things that you're going to do relative to people being saved and preaching the gospel and people understanding the Bible. But there are certain things that fall out of your life, for instance, Crest or Colgate, that are irrelevant, that just sort of, I mean, as he's creating, other things just kind of come along for the ride because they have to fulfill
Yeah,
the rest
yeah,
of
I
what
think.
happens in life.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
is that
yeah,
right?
I think in the sense of predestination that we're talking about, and this also covers why some of the evil and the problem of evil, as he was talking about earlier, is you have these seemingly infinite, but not actually infinite number of feasible worlds, all the different ways things could
Sure.
go.
Mhm.
And so God selects to actualize one of those worlds, and in that sense, predestines everything that's going to happen. But he doesn't really, it's not that important whether in that world Pritchett uses Crest or Colgate. But what's so you're going to come what comes along for the ride, so to speak, with a lot of that is stuff that is I don't know if we would say irrelevant in some kind of butterfly effect, but not the end game that he's trying to get to.
Right. So there may actually be a dozen or 100 possible worlds that are kind of, it doesn't matter. It's half a dozen the other, because all of the important things are all the same. And so there's
I would,
another possible world there where he actually chose Colgate, but everything else is the same.
right.
That world is still it's equal to this one in that it doesn't matter which
That's
one.
why I objected to the writing in the Infinity War where there was only 1 out of 14 million, because I'm like, well, I would actually believe like the number of feasible worlds that still accomplished all of God's purposes in the same way, except in one world I choose Colgate and one world I use Crest. That's why I don't like the one world, but that's because they're not God.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
in
if you don't assume a Molinist view, the number one is a sense of dread, because how are they possibly going to navigate? And I think that what happens shortly thereafter is 5 years later, and so that even makes the 14 million thing even more uh, dreadful, because we've had 5 years of things going on that could have ruined the one, and we just don't know. So, but that's that's the non-Molinist view of the Avengers and Endgame. So that's fine.
Hey, if you don't mind, thanks for giving me a break. My bladder was about to burst.
Sure.
I'll just say this. Maybe this will save us some time, and so we don't have to go through all those passages, because I'm willing to grant, for the sake of argument, that those passages don't entail, don't have a necessary entailment of predestination. What I would argue is that it's a rational view with the whole of Scripture in mind. It's not, or I'll just say it's not irrational to reach that conclusion. That rational folks could disagree on those, and so I would just, so unless you want to say no, it's utterly irrational. There's no way that these passages mean predestination like you do. Then we could have that conversation. But my point is I've personally been convinced scripturally that God does predestine all things. But even if I'm wrong, and that's not what the Bible teaches, I would reach that conclusion philosophically as well. So I have a dual warrant for that view.
Okay, so what's your philosophical warrant for that?
That God is a maximally great being. And so if God is a maximally great being, he is perfect in power, perfect in love, and perfect in knowledge. And given that commitment, he's also a necessary being, and things like that. But given that commitment of maximal greatness, which is not just an assumption, it's a conclusion by the ontological argument by itself. And we can get there through a cumulative case of other arguments, at least abductively. So we have so many really good reasons to affirm that God is a maximally great being, let alone Scripture.
Yeah, I agree.
So with that being the case, I can reach these conclusions completely philosophically. I just happen to, but then that also informs. Now you could say, well, you just think that because you already started with as a Reformed guy that thought God predestines everything. Like, sure, but I mean, I've changed my views on a lot of things. Obviously, I give up Calvinism and determinism. So So I do let philosophy and logic inform my interpretation of Scripture. So I don't hold that God predestines all things just because I believe Scripture says it does. I think it's a rational view based from Scripture, but I'm not willing to say, oh, okay, maybe the way I am interpreting that, maybe I'm misinterpreting that verse. Fine, then we're going to have to tackle all of the philosophical arguments that I give. And a big part of it is, as I was describing to the Emmaus Highway guy, I don't see a way scripturally to make sense. If the open theist is going to say, well, these either counterfactual or future tense propositions regarding libertarian free agents don't have truth values, I don't see how that we can make that work biblically. Definitely
Sure. No, I agree.
abductively, yeah.
Well, I think there's, and to me, this is primarily dealing with Calvinism, but I suppose it somewhat applies in this case that God doesn't need a settled future in order to bring things about.
And I say, well, what does settled mean?
Meaning that from the beginning of creation to the end of creation, there is at least a string of events that God has either determines or you could even say foreknows that are going to occur.
As long as we avoid the word determined, I'm great with it. But okay. When I hear settled or decree or
well, let me define it a little bit better then. I would say a settled future is one for which all contingents relevant to that creation are resolved from creation.
Okay, so in that way, since determined wasn't used, I'm fine with that, and I think that works on. If God is omniscient, then whatever. And again, well, what does resolved mean? I just say, look, God can, and just like I believe Dr. Strange did in the movies, Dr. Strange ensured the end with determining the end. He could guarantee the end without determining the end.
Right.
And that's and really.
But is that
I'll just really quickly add this. Dr. Strange didn't even need to know that Peter Quill got a knee strike below the belt by Gamora. He didn't need to know that. I think it's fair to say he did know it. But even if you want to say, oh, he didn't know all this other gratuitous stuff that was going on, he just knew the end game. And that's all. I mean, you could even go there. And so you could say, there's some views on open theism where you could say, well, God doesn't know how we're going to freely choose in all these intermediate events, but he does know the end. Like, oh, okay, you could do that. That's not my view, but I'm just saying it's a possible one.
Oh, well, yeah, I think.
Hey, before you go on exegeting, how about one more thought or comment, and then we'll have to move it on. If that's, I'm really sorry.
Sure. No, that's fine.
I appreciate you coming.
And let me ask you, are you an open theist?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm kind of a Greg Boyd. So.
Oh yeah.
So bivalent future contains contingents rather than unresolved contingencies rather than resolved contingencies, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
and again, so I just have to say, okay, well, let's define resolved, and
there's a lot of things that go into that, but yeah.
So, and I would ask me one more question here because I know we're running low on time, but
sure.
If you message Braxton, you can give him my email. Make sure, and let's continue this conversation because I like your approach to this. You're easy to talk to, and I think you and I could have some really good conversations moving forward.
Yes, anyone can email us, and you can run it back to get this at braxton@trinityradio.org.
Trinity Radio, okay. All right. I guess, well, if I have one question left, is God still maximal if he intentionally creates a universe that has an open future, that he knows all the possible contingencies and how he's going to achieve his end?
Okay. If he say it for me one more time.
Dynamic omniscience. Basically, he knows all the ways it could go.
All the ways it could go and how his actions are going to result in the end that he chooses. Can God create a universe where the future is not, where future is contingent, and God knows how his actions are going to bring about what he wants to end?
I would say that's going to be, we're going to have to really flesh that out. But my first initial red flag that I'm seeing is that the only way to guarantee that I can tell, and maybe there's other ways that I don't see on the table right now, but I see only two ways for God to guarantee an end,
Mhm.
and one is through determined means and one is through middle knowledge. If it's but here's the problem, as I was saying to somebody earlier, I think it was Emmaus, if you're going to start saying, well, God can guarantee without this middle knowledge, then that means there's a whole bunch of sin and evil that has to happen to get to the end game, and then that means that God is using his power to necessitate the sin and evil to get us to the best end game. And so then I'm like, oh, well, why not be a Calvinist at that point? Because one of the reasons why you and I want to reject Calvinism is because God determines evil on that view.
Well, I don't think it's necessitate. I think just God knowing humans, knowing how things could go and how things are likely to go, he can say, yeah, if I let these people go, they're going to fall into sin. And there are going to be sin. We don't have to have specific sins and
But
specific
can he
things.
guarantee an end game, millions of years in the future?
Well, yes. And here's the thing that I think that we're missing is that I think there are millions of different ways, different possible courses of the future that arrive at what God wants to accomplish. We don't have to arrive at this point in this specific time with this person making this choice in order for this to happen, because there could be any number of possible agents that God works to bring about or works with to bring to those. So it's not a case of we have one strand that we have to get to this end, but rather we have possibly even an infinite number of strands that all end that. Not all of them, but the ones that God guides all end at the same place.
That just seems like Molinism to me, because at least my view of
God doesn't
Molinism,
have to know. God doesn't have to know all the individual choices that people are going to make along the way.
I
That's
agree.
the difference. So
I agree with that.
But in Molinism, he does.
And in fact, I even said earlier, one view that one could have of Molinism is that God just knows the end game. Or maybe I was talking about Dr. Strange in particular, but I've said this could be a view that an open theist holds, is that no, he didn't choose the world based on all the different strands to get to the end game. He just chose the end game. He said, that's the end game I want. And however we get there, we get there. And if that's the best feasible, freedom permitting end game, then no matter what pain, evil, or suffering is along the way to get there, it's justified. And so God is a maximally great being, with that in mind, even if
I don't know how you would say it was justified, but we're getting off on another path,
well,
and you want to go on to somebody else.
In the same way that Dr. Strange was justified and rightfully seen as a hero for creating the one world in which half the universe is dead and gets killed.
I'm not. I don't know that I would. Well, again, he's operating in a circumstance that already exists. He operates in this circumstance that already exists.
Not a perfect analogy, but it gets us close enough. Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, guys, I'm really not good at this. I'm so polite to people that are on my show and so glad anybody's even watching that I always hate to end a conversation. But thank you, Exegeting, and I hope you'll come back on in the future.
I hope to talk to you.
Thank you.
Let's talk more.
All right. Thanks, Exegeting. All right. Not a tame. Have you got time for 3 more?
Hey, I had a bathroom break, so
okay. All right. This is not a tame sheep. I don't know what he is, except that he appears to be a bald brother, and I love my bald brothers. So welcome to the show, Not a Tame Sheep.
Hey, Pope Braxton. This is Jordan Ferrier.
Hey, Jordan.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
Good to see
you just
brother.
don't know my YouTube channel is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that comes from.
There's only one Pope here.
Oh, Subprime. Glad you're back.
There's only one Prime too. I earned that nickname, and you can go see its origins on this channel.
All right.
I mean, I'm a psychopathic killer in the example, but it's still.
Yeah.
Anyways, it comes from, Aslan being not a tame lion, and we're supposed to be followers, so not a tame sheep. That's where I got the name from.
He's not safe.
Yeah. So
Jordan's good.
Yeah. Several people sent me the link to this. Will Hess being one of them said I should come on here, so here I am. Since you guys probably don't know me, I'm not a Calvinist, not a determinist, not a Protestant, not Reformed. And what I found entertaining from listening to this stream is I'm kind of in the same boat with Dr. Stratton, where we're fighting off the determinists on one side, and then we're fighting off the open theists and dynamic omniscience people on the other side, because we're in the middle.
Yeah.
And Tim has read my stuff in the past where I critique his stuff. And I just want to say that from my perspective, I'm not arguing against libertarian free will because I'm arguing for determinism. And I feel like you think that's what I'm doing, that I'm critiquing your arguments because I think your arguments are so wrong and determinism is right. And that's not what I'm trying to do. When I offer you critique, it's because I'm trying to point out the holes in your argument to make them stronger.
That's great. I don't know if I've ever really assumed a position or a motivation. I just try to I just look at whatever you send me and I'm like, all right, let's roll with it. So
all right. Yeah. Well, like one example, I wrote a paper on your response to your article with JP Moreland. And one of the things I pointed out was about God could give people a false belief. And in your latest video that you did, was it ETS or that you accounted for that? The guy added the guy that went after you, he like added that in. And I'm like, I wonder if he listened to me or if he got that from more people than just
iron sharpens iron, brother.
But there it was. So that was good. So I'm not here to prove Molinism wrong. Mike,
you here to ask a question, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm going to ask some questions.
Let's do that.
All right. So first of all, I just want to point out that in the Concord, Molina over and over again, as I understand him, as I am reading him, does not affirm that God predestines all things. He actually argues against that. As I read him, he only argues that the only thing that God predestines is the elect. He does not predestine the people that go to hell. And Molina is against that being predestined by God.
I think that's right.
So when you keep saying that God predestines all things, my immediate, hopefully logical thought is, well, if God predestines all things, then who determines what God predestines? Because if God predestines all things and God determines what he predestines, you've really only moved the argument back one step. Now, I know I've listened to your arguments. Determinism is not, or predestination is not determinism. Do you at least understand the objection? The concern that I have where you say, when God predestines all things, that, for one, Molina doesn't agree with that. And two, I don't understand how you can say God predestines all things and then just ignore that God determines what he predestines.
Okay. So first of all, that's a really good question. And so as I said, I don't know if you saw the first part of this video, but I said,
no, I didn't.
Yeah, I said, I disagree with Molina on a lot of things. I don't even like the word Molinism because it sounds like a skin disease or skin condition or something, but that's what we're left with.
All right.
I wish we could figure out a different word for it, but yeah, I'm a mere Molinist. So yeah, mere Molinism just commits me to a human libertarian freedom and God's divine middle knowledge. And once I affirm those two things, then I argue that God can predestine libertarian free actions, and then that means by definition that it can't be determined. But
okay,
it is
that's sufficient.
Okay,
that's sufficient. So again, what I would say to that is when I read the Concordia, what Molina appears to me to be doing is he's trying to merge Aquinas with Augustine. And because he straight up puts Calvin and Luther on blast. I mean, it's like like a flamethrower against those two guys. He's not putting, I think it's, who wrote the one on Molina? That's McGregor. I think McGregor says he put Calvin in conversation with Aquinas. And I mean, that's not really, that one. But that's not really that far off because Calvin is Augustine. Augustine is philosophical voluntarism, it's theological voluntarism, it's nominalism, it's compatibilism. All of the stuff that Calvin is doing is in Augustine. So it's not really that far off to say that. It's just kind of ironic that Molina blasts him. But anyway, so that's my problem, is that you're not getting to the point that divides between Calvin and Augustine versus Aquinas. And Molina is he's trying to straddle both camps.
I guess I would just I can agree with you, but that's not my it's not my goal. So although I spent half my book, at least in the first edition, surveying these different historical thinkers, the point there was to get to how did we get to this point where all these different views came into being, and we've had this huge disagreement over the last 500 years. How did we get there? So that was mostly my point with doing the historical survey. And I think it's important when you can see, oh, this is why some denominations are thinking this, and this is why others are thinking this. But my case is really then at that point, once we understand why we're here, what I've tried to do is say, look, I don't care what any of these historical thinkers thought. I want to make a case based on Tim Stratton's arguments. And so, like I agree with Augustine on some things, disagree with him on a whole bunch of things. Recently, I was on a video where I said, Augustine said a lot of things. I think he started to lose his mind later in life. So I point people to his earlier writings.
Yeah, most of the heresies in the church today can be traced back to Augustine.
Yeah,
it's just a factual statement.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, man.
So, So again, Thomas Flint, Divine Providence, the Molinist account, he sides completely with Augustine, with voluntarism. And when I look at, Augustine, Duns Scotus, Aquinas, Molina, Calvin, all of them, they either sided with intellectualism or voluntarism. And you were on a stream with Tyson, James, and you asked James White a question, and he answered it. And you called it universal possibilism.
I remember that.
Yeah, that's voluntarism. That's in the Institutes that Calvin affirms that. And that's what Aquinas was arguing against. Yeah. So again, all I'm trying to say, you need to address that, because that's more of that's not the starting place, but it's more of the starting place that gets you to freedom, that gets you to where you want to be with libertarian free choice, an undetermined choice, a contingent choice. And
I have no problem with saying, hey, that's interesting, but I don't see how that impacts any of the deductive arguments I make for metaphysical conclusions.
Right. That's why when I critique your arguments, you don't understand what I'm saying, because you don't think it's important, or you don't understand the difference.
No, I think I understand it, and I say it's important, but it's not what I want to do, and I don't think it makes a difference to what my specific goals and motivations are. But I encourage you to do it, because I think it's like I don't do a lot of work in the historical resurrection of Jesus. I think it's probably the most important thing out there, and I encourage others to do it. I'm like, please do it, because I'm following it, I'm learning from it, but it's not part of my case typically. So I have specific goals in mind, and I don't think that's, and it's still relevant. It's not, but it's not directly relevant, but it's still something where I would encourage you to do it, and then we can partner together and say, hey, look, at when we combine our works together, this is what we get. So that's kind of, I only have enough time to focus on things,
I understand that. The thing that I would submit to you is that I think if you took the time, and it wouldn't take that long, that you would see how it is relevant to what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So again, I want to move things along. So another thing I want to talk to you about is in your last video, you said something to the effect that causation is determinism. Like if God is the cause of something, God determined it. Are you kind of equating? What's the difference between causation and determinism?
Well, God can cause something in a sense, like.
But you are trying to break the chain of causation.
Deterministic causation.
So are you trying to break the chain of causation, or you're trying to break the chain of determinism? Are they separate or are they identical?
Causal determinism. So something can be caused in a non-deterministic way. So again, I mean, since everything is contingent ultimately upon God, in one sense of the word cause, I would say that God causes all things, because but I would reject that God causally determines all things because of the specific definition of what it means for an event to be determined. So, and so predestination you could call predestination a kind of causation, but it's non-deterministic causation, which allows then for libertarian freedom. So, I usually don't use causation language. When I do, I say causal determinism, typically, not always. Especially talking off the top of my head, I might say, oh, well, that's the cause, blah, blah, blah. But when I'm writing and really trying to be careful, I'm going after determinism, or what it means for God to determine an event and then determine all events, which then transfers to all of your thoughts and your beliefs and your physical actions. So that's ultimately.
Yeah, if I could. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to, just 1 second. Yeah, we're going, but we'll be late. All right.
Sorry about that. And on that note, maybe offer your last final thoughts here.
It's so much fun. So,
yeah. So I was just talking about this with Will today, because we've been talking about the difference between causation and determinism, and how I made the mistake of thinking that we needed to break the chain of causation versus breaking the chain of determinism. So like Molina says, God is the universal efficient cause. And so I've done a lot of work on how Aquinas and Calvin and Molina talk about causation, how Aquinas used Aristotelian causation to break the chain of determinism. Calvin borrowed the terms proximate, intermediate, and remote cause from Aquinas. And then he uses causation to break the chain of responsibility, of human responsibility. So God determines all things, but using Aquinas's causation, he makes it so God isn't responsible for the evil that he determines. And I can explain that to you, and I can give you all of the quotes from Calvin that show how he does that. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that this is how he does it.
Yeah.
And Molina borrowed, because he was trying to balance Aquinas. That's where this universal efficient cause came from, because Molina's agreeing with Aquinas. So if you want to show how to break the chain of determinism, Aquinas did it using causation. Like I said, I've talked to Will about it, and
well, I definitely don't. I mean, and it depends when you talk to a room full of Thomist scholars, you'll have them disagreeing on if we have libertarian freedom or not, or if determinism is true. I've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, most Thomist scholars, though, are Roman Catholics, so they are trying to, because Augustine's a doctor of the church and Aquinas is a doctor of the church, they have, because of the teaching magisterium, they have to keep them together instead of separate them.
Yeah.
So you're getting a version of Thomism that's trying to do what Molina did, bring them together instead of separating them.
Well, I sincerely think, and I know you know this, Jordan, that if Thomas was alive today, he would affirm what I'm calling mere Molinism. and probably with a focus on the mere, the MERE. But
well, I think most of what you're saying is affirmed by Aquinas.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
and
I think so.
I've tried to express to you many times that I would really like to help you with quotes of Aquinas that would further refine your argument, that would make it better.
Well, I think you have my email, so send them my way.
All right.
All right.
So I'll let you guys go on to the next
Thanks,
one.
Jordan.
Thank you,
I really appreciate it.
And
nice
Jordan,
talking to you guys.
I do want to tell you how much I appreciate you, and your knowledge of original sources is amazing. Whenever I have a question, I know where to go.
All right. Thank you, sir.
That's great. Thanks, Jordan. All right. We got 2 left. We're going to go to Nathaniel Key. I hope I'm saying that right. And then Open Book 42 will be our last one for the day. And I can tell that Dr. Stratton, someone in his family, is urging him along. So, Nathaniel, welcome to the show. Another bald brother.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Good. Nathaniel.
Love my bald brother.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it very much. I've been a shadow lurker among all these channels for a long time, but I've never spoken out. Anyways, short background. I have been a Molinist for most of my life. It was through the Tim Barber debate with Dr. White that I then started getting challenged on some of my beliefs on things. And so I've kind of spent the last year or so reconstructing into a hybrid form of open theism, but I'm not really set on it. I'm really just studying. I'm trying to figure stuff out. And so I have some questions that maybe you can help me understand a little better from the Molinist perspective, some things that I have been a little unsure about. I'm sure Warren or Tim or like an Alan Rhoda would do much better than me. But anyway, first question for you would be, do you see God as like outside of time, atemporal, or more like the Dr. Craig version of he can experience sequence and things like that?
Timeless sans creation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that would be like once creation begins, then he is more sequential.
Yes, but he doesn't experience time as we do. So right now I'm in the central time zone. And I'll say that, yeah, God is in time right now, but he's not in any time zone. Unless, Jesus was during the incarnation, obviously. But just in the sense that an omnipotent God has the power to erase all he's ever created and just exist as a Trinity sans or apart without creation once again, right? But then he could never create again for the first time. And so logically, it's impossible for God to ever be in a state where he's never done anything, where he's never acted and made change occur. So, but there was a state of God's triune, existence where it was timeless and static, and where nothing happened. And it wasn't like it was a long period of time, and it wasn't like it was just a short amount of time, because there was no time. So that's my view on it. In fact, Dr. Craig just analyzed Braxton and me and Pritchett on a video that we did together talking about time, and Dr. Craig, I think, basically gave us a stamp of approval. So for the most part. But yeah, that I affirm Dr. Craig's position that God is timeless sans creation. So I give it back to you.
All right. So you may have already answered this, so forgive me if it's the case.
That's all right.
You do believe that God had the freedom to actualize among many worlds, not just a single reality. He wasn't forced into like a particular creation. He had the freedom to create or not to create, for example.
At bottom, or at the least, he had the ability to refrain from creation or to create this world. It could be that there were multiple tied for the best feasible worlds. And so, I mean, who knows how many that would be. But I also argue in the literature that it's at least possible, for all we know, that there was only one feasible freedom permitting world in which evil is ultimately defeated and everyone who's not transworld damned is saved. Just like it was for basically Doctor Strange. Within the 14,605,000 worlds that he was aware of, there was only one. And so I say, like, it could be the case for God, given his knowledge of all the possible worlds that he could create. So, but minimally, there's an equal choice between that requires then God's libertarian freedom to either remain in a static state of aseity or to create. Let's suppose that this world is the best feasible, freedom permitting world with the best endgame. Then I say that it's either between his triune state and this world. So you at least have a choice between two alternatives, which gives you libertarian freedom.
Well, thank you for explaining that. And I'll move along. Sorry, I know you're short on time.
Right.
So here would be a question, and this kind of gets to the open view a little bit. So does this mean then, would it entail, and I know these are probably not claims you make, but would it be fair to entail that there was a point in God's existence where there would have been an open future, where there wasn't a specific truth value about whether, like, what he would create? Like, for example, he could have created one world or another, and he hadn't necessarily made up his mind. I know it maybe was in the atemporal state.
Exactly. And so it gets language is hard here. So in that timeless sans creation state, that's where we divide it now up into logical moments, since there's not temporal moments. And so all in that one state, in the first logical moment of in the static state, God knows everything he could do, and he also knows everything that would happen if he created one way or the other. So he knows the relevant truth values to all propositions. What changes is simultaneous with the decree is that now everything that he knew would happen if he created this world, now he knows will happen in this world. But that also includes everything that he knew would freely happen in a non-deterministic circumstance. Now he knows will happen freely in a non-deterministic circumstance. So one thing I point out is that what changes once God chooses, he doesn't gain new propositional knowledge in any relevant sense. Like, he's not surprised at things now. But as Braxton and I were discussing in the video that Dr. Craig interacted with on his podcast, you can say that he learns in a sense. So, like, okay, right now it's 2:40 or what time? 3:44 p.m. Central Time. But a minute ago he knew it was 3:43. He also knew prior to creation that you and I would be having this discussion freely, that we would be having this discussion, and then once he created, he knew that we will have this discussion. But just because would changes to will, the word freely doesn't magically disappear. Does that make sense?
It does. So to clarify to the original question, does that mean that there would have been a level of openness to the way, like, from the atemporal logical moment, was there a point in God's existence where the future wasn't certain in his mind?
I wouldn't put it like that. I would say in the logic, so you can say in the logical moment, he has not, the decree is not during that logical moment of natural knowledge. Now in that same timeless state, he's got the middle knowledge. So he knows everything that would happen if he creates free creatures in certain scenarios. And so he knows that Nathaniel will wear a black jacket on, what's the date today? I don't even know. December. What's the date today?
23rd.
December 23rd. I should have known that. Man, I got to wrap Christmas presents. Okay.
Me too.
So he knew. So he knew that you would freely choose to wear a black jacket on this day. So he wasn't like, and that's if he created this world. So that propositional knowledge.
And the if is the big point.
What's that?
Would be the distinction between I will do this or if I do this. And so I think, based on the claim of Molinism, there's a pretty big if for God, because he could have done otherwise.
Yes, if he's
so
omnipotent.
It starts with an open premise, I think.
But
right?
I don't think it's in the same sense that like an open theist would use the term. So the open theist would say, well, that God can't know these counterfactual or truth tense or future tense propositions, or that there simply aren't truth values to these future tense and counterfactual propositions. Um,
And now some of your open theist guys will do the belief of like basically atemporal sans creation, right? And then at that point he can decree things and be in time. I've seen that.
Yeah, I think Warren McGrew, for example, and I we're both dynamic time guys, A theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, then, without trying to get into the specific claims of open theism, because I think most people probably understand the idea of dynamic omniscience who are watching this channel, but and you've done a lot of work on that recently.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for the sake of time, let me move on a little bit, because the next question would be this decree of God's, or at least what he predestines, so to speak. His knowledge is not limited in scope, right? It would be exhaustive in his knowledge of what this reality he's actualizing entails. Would that be correct?
Okay, are you talking about prior to his decision to create?
Well, so when he determines what world to actualize or what reality to bring about.
Okay. He knows all right. He knows the truth. I would say that he knows the truth value to all the propositions regarding this world. That's my
he would know all the facts of all aspects of eternity in this actualized reality, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, as I said to one of our other callers, there are some views that I think might be more open to the open theist that are kind of compatible with Molinism, where you say that God chooses a world based on the end game alone and doesn't give himself knowledge of these different pathways that people will take. So he just doesn't know how you will freely choose. He just on what you're going to wear today and what you're going to eat for dinner tonight, things like that. But he does know how it all turns out in the end. Similar to the Doctor Strange thing, but that's not my view. I just offer it as maybe a way to find some middle ground, a bridge between open theism and Molinism. But
well, I have. So here would be one of the hard questions, okay? Because I've been kind of setting the stage, and I'm sorry, I probably should have done this in a different way. So I apologize if you have to get somewhere. But so for the people that God creates, he foreknew who he would create, who would exist, right? In addition to this, he also knows their eternity exhaustively, right? So would it then be fair to say that God creates people with no hope, intention, or expectation of saving those who eventually end up in hell?
So it depends on one's view of hell. And as I said, you probably weren't here for the beginning, but I did talk about how in an academic journal, I wrote about and touch on the possibility of hopeful universalism given Molinism. And I think Molinism gives the best shot at hopeful universalism, even though I'm not a universalist. But I am a hopeful universalist. And so I hope that it's the case that there was a world available where God created the one feasible, freedom permitting world in which evil is ultimately defeated and everybody is ultimately saved, even if they have to go through, say, millions of years of hell. But hell would not be eternal, but it would sure seem like it given the millions or billions of years that people might need there.
But that would be your view, right?
That's not my view. I would hold to a view more similar to eternal conscious, and I don't like the eternal conscious torment, but I say eternal conscious separation from God, that I would say is more along the lines of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce view of hell. That's my personal view. But what I've done is show that how these different Chris Date's view of annihilationism, I think, makes much more sense on a Molinistic view than it does on on his own Calvinistic view. I know many people that feel that way about it. I don't hold annihilationism personally as my preferred view, but I'm open to it. It's still eternal separation. So for all those that are all worked up over Kirk Cameron out there, I'm like, settle down. It's a biblically defensible position, even though most Christians haven't held the view. Now let me back up. I think what you're mostly concerned with is, does God, so even on on annihilationism or on my great divorce view, even though I don't call it eternal conscious torment, is God intentionally creating people he knows are damned, right?
Well, not just knows, but like he's creating them with no expectation otherwise. The purpose of creating them is for their, like their end. Let's just say he has 15 trillion years of knowledge of them being in hell, or at least their final state in hell if you're an annihilationist. His creation of them, there's no expectation, hope, or intention for their salvation.
I think I would say, well, he knows. And, one thing that Kirk McGregor says is that doesn't mean he doesn't have the intention. And God hopes. McGregor once said this. He said, can't remember where, but he's like, but God hopes and does everything possible to, I'm not getting his words right, to make it so that the folks who reject him actually could respond to his love and grace. But he knows they won't. And he says, even though God tries, alas, he knows they won't. And no, he says, and alas, God is never wrong, but I think I think we need to be careful about shifting from motivations and intentions and desires and things like that versus simply what God knows. And so if the question is, well, then why would God create them? Well, one of our callers brought up the difference between traducianism and creationism. If traducianism is true, and I think a really strong case can be made that way, but I lean toward traducianism, but I'm not opposed to creationism. I'm close friends and colleagues with Joshua Ryan Ferris, who's a creationist. But if traducianism is true, then I've got a friend when I was still a youth pastor, and he was a high school student, and he was coming to my apologetics breakfast club that I would have once a week with high school boys before school started. We'd all go to the local restaurant and have breakfast together and talk apologetics. And this atheist came there. He was raised in an atheist home, and was just, hated the idea of Christianity. So he started coming because he was going to disprove this youth pastor. In 2 weeks, after a second week there, he gave his life to Christ. And this is probably, 15 years ago now. Now, interestingly, his parents are still atheists and don't, they're getting old and don't show any, it doesn't seem like they have any intention about changing their views. So why would God allow these folks who seemingly are going to be damned to exist? Why would a loving God do that? Well, because Sam wouldn't be born on that view, and God knew that that Sam would. And so why should the choices of Sam's parents to freely choose to reject God's love and grace stop Sam from existing and having an eternal love relationship with his creator? So if traducianism is true, then God is justified in doing that, especially if he does everything to make it possible for them to be saved. And like I said, we're assuming an eternal separation, conscious separation view, or annihilationism. And we can always say, well, gosh, maybe that hopeful universalism view is true. So there's a lot of, so Molinism by itself doesn't talk to this point. It's just, okay, what do we do with, how can Molinism be applied to these different views of hell?
Yeah, and I think it's helpful just to kind of reframe the question and say something like, okay, I understand that. I mean, I think every Christian thinks about this at some point in their lives, even if no one prompts them to think about any of these topics. They think, well, why would God create anyone he knows will go to hell? And I think a way of thinking about it is, well, is it unjust for God to create free creatures that he knows will freely reject him if they could have accepted him. And I would say it's not unjust. They had the opportunity. Now, it may not be appealing to the senses to think, yeah, but he still knew. Yeah, but it wasn't unjust if they had the opportunity to accept Christ and didn't. I mean, that's how I think about this.
And with the C.S. Lewis view in mind, the gates of hell are locked from the inside, you know. And so I play with that possibility, in that you know, I don't affirm and say this is how it is, but I look at all the different views that we can put on the table and evaluate them. And I'm open. I do a video where I discuss the different views that I thought there's, like Chris State's view. I used to think there's no way that's possible. Well, he convinced me that it's biblically defensible. And C.S. Lewis's view, I was like, there's no way that's possible. And I'm like, well, gosh, you know, given the genre of these Greco-Roman biographies, that might be the case that we can make sense of that too. So yeah, I don't know, Nathaniel, I might not be answering your question, but I'll just say that mere Molinism on its own doesn't address these views, but we can apply it to these different views of hell and say, okay, well, what way works best here? What do you think? You know, so what do you think, Nathaniel?
Well, I know we're short on time, and I would love to have time to really dig into this deeper.
Yeah, I'd like that too.
I feel like there's definitely some areas I'd like to push back and clarify a little bit in that.
Well, I would just say, Nathaniel, I told this to, I don't know who it was, or maybe Jordan. I don't know who. No. It was exegeting Calvinism. There's a private chat, and those of you that are in here as, you know, as backstage guests, you can put your email in there, and Dr. Stratton will see that, and he can respond, and maybe that'd be a good way to get at. But thanks so much for being on the show today, Nathaniel. I really appreciate it. Oh, yeah. And I want you to know that people have been making a number of bald slur-based egg jokes about this excellent stream, and I told them they just have scrambled soteriology. But we'll move on now from that.
Nathaniel,
and thanks so much, Nathaniel. Take care.
Let's talk some more.
And now we'll bring on the open book 42-Brian.
Hey,
Thank
Brian.
you so much for being here, Brian. You're the last caller of the day.
Ooh.
Well, thanks for taking me. I joined late, and I appreciate you guys staying on for so long.
Yeah.
I am a la, I guess, Warren McGrew, because that's just an easy way to describe my theology.
Well, then we're going to be good friends, because he's one of my favorite guys.
Great. Well, I appreciate your guys' thoughtfulness and your care with Scripture. And I wanted to posit maybe a philosophical. I mean, I have a lot of scriptural reasons for my position, and as you guys do, but a philosophical position I'd like to challenge you with. Quantum mechanics and our ability to sort of see down to the smallest level shows that there seems to be chance built into reality, some level of probabilisticness.
Yeah. Indeterminacy.
And if God created reality in this way, well, I guess before I get there, do you believe that the future exists? Right now,
No.
Does the future exist?
I think we're both atheists.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
Warren and I are both dynamic guys. Yeah.
I would posit that God built in chance so that he could show how actually great he is. I think a maximally great being can work in spite of unlimited numbers of libertarian free agents. And I think he does that through ways like dreams. So Cyrus, your objection with Cyrus, right? I would say God could have easily brought that about with some dreams that planted a seed. He did not force it, but he influenced it. And he's wise enough to know the hearts of the people he's interacting with, the times and everything, that he could bring that to come to pass.
So I agree, but it cannot be a guarantee if it's not determined. So he could not guarantee it unless he determines it, especially when you're looking at, and this is why with the Cyrus and the Peter, with Peter, it's three specific detailed things regarding multiple libertarian agents. And with Cyrus, it's regarding great distance of time, 200 years, you know, and at least 150 years before the guy's even born. But it's not just Cyrus, it's with multitudes of free agents that he's surrounding. And so it gets really ad hoc to me, hard to believe that if God is going to give these prophecies, and by the way, in the Old Testament, prophets who speak on behalf of God if they get a prophecy wrong,
it's conditional.
If they get a prophecy wrong, what's
It's
the
a
command?
conditional prophecy if they get it wrong. I mean, that's
But
that.
what is the
I don't
command?
think that prophecy. I think that test is actually not about future knowledge, right?
Well, I think it is, because if a prophet is going to speak something and say this is how something's going to happen, the test of a prophet is to see if it happens. And so the penalty was death at that time. Now, here's where I find that hard. This is where it gets hard. If they're speaking on behalf of God, and God could get things wrong, and then God's going to kill them for it, that doesn't seem like a maximally great being at all. But with that said, even if we bracket that problem, I do think that chance, at randomness exists. I am very open to the quantum. I mean, because I'm open to the randomness of the quantum realm. Sure. And I think that we have libertarian freedom. So as I was describing to Colton earlier, either we're determined, and if we're not determined, then our actions, mental and physical, are either random or they're rational. And by rational, I mean libertarian free choices. Now, with chance, randomness, and libertarian freedom, with those agents in mind, and God still giving prophecy or guarantees about what's going to happen in the future, God either has to know this via mental knowledge, or he has to step in if he's going to guarantee things and start determining at least some things. But a big problem of that is going to be sin and evil. And the whole reason why open theists, to their credit, which they're right about, is want to leave Calvinism and oppose Calvinism, is because we can't have a God that's determining evil. Amen to that. But if God can't guarantee the end via mental knowledge, then he's got to start tinkering and determining things, which is going to lead to some of the same.
I don't see that as a necessary entailment of that view. I think that God is such a good chess player, let's say, if we use that analogy, infinitely higher than we can even perceive, that he can make whatever he wants to come to pass without determining it, through influencing free agents via circumstance, via dreams, via whatever, via prompting of the Holy Spirit for believers who are in the area.
I like how you said influence, but I like how you said influence there and avoided determined.
No, he's not determining it.
No, I know. I said you avoided it.
Right. Yeah.
No, I said you avoided it
by
using the term influence. But if it's a mere influence, then God cannot guarantee it.
I see. I think I don't think that follows. I think that's a presupposition you have. I think God is infinitely capable.
But do we have
knows us so intimately, right?
I think this is going to work a lot of times, but it's not going to work with great distance or in detail. With Peter denying.
Okay, let's talk about Cyrus. Did God say that it would be exactly when Cyrus would be raised to accomplish his purpose? Did God give a definite time frame, or is there wiggle room in the prophecy?
Definitely. Yeah, that I recall is just about a future event that
exactly. So I don't think that the way it turned out necessarily had to be the way it happened.
I agree with that, but that's not
okay. So then really it's like 200 years. Maybe that was when it happened that God could accomplish his purpose in bringing this prophecy to come to pass. And maybe it was 190 years if somebody else had made a different decision.
But here's the problem: is there's so much at play there. Unless we're going to say that God was, even if you want to say, well, it's not determining sin, but here's the micromanager going to influence everybody to sin so that this guy named Cyrus can come back.
No, he just knows people. He knows us. He knows people. He knows our hearts. He knows what we're going to do. Just like, if you offered your child chocolate versus broccoli, what's the difference?
But look, then there's, so he has the truth value of future contingents about free agents. Sure. The future
but not specific. I reject the specificity. So here's another thing. If God knows a single future perfectly, and we go into an infinite future, does he know the infinite, like something 17 quadrillion years into the future that's happening in our new heavens and new earth? He knows exactly what's going to happen throughout all time. Is that right? I don't. Yeah. I mean, I
don't even have to grant that, or I can just say, oh no, he knows what's going to happen until the new heavens and new earth start. Let's just go there.
Okay. And so this is mostly philosophical, or do you, I mean, like I see with scriptural stuff about predestination and foreknowledge, right? When Paul is using prognoskio for foreknowledge, right? He's reading the Septuagint in his interpretation, which uses the Hebrew yada, which is a relational knowledge. So a lot of times you can see foreknowledge is not really I see something in the future, but it's I knew these people intimately. Right.
Like
so there's different interpretations. I don't think scripture per se. And honestly, we end up in different places. I'm totally happy with both brothers in Christ, as lots of different Christians are, right? But from where I land, I am trying to come up with a scriptural understanding that's solid. And part of the reason I'm here is because I'm trying to test these ideas against scripture.
Amen.
And I've done a lot of work on that front, but I'm just dynamic omniscience a la Warren Group. Would you say that is a valid scriptural interpretation? You just don't hold to it because you see a stronger interpretation for something else.
Okay,
or are there strong objections you have?
Well, I've said, and I've written on this, and and it's in my forthcoming book as well, I think. I can't remember everything I put in there. But I talk about one manner of dynamic omniscience is compatible with Molinism. It depends on how one defines your term. So I will ask you, how do you explain, what are the key, I say for mere Molinism, you need two things minimum. You need human libertarian freedom and God's middle knowledge. What do you say is entailed by dynamic omniscience?
I would say what's entailed is that God's middle, maybe a term like proximate foreknowledge, even though I don't like foreknowledge, but like the closer we are to now, God knows it more perfectly. But the further time horizon you get, right? He knows things as perfectly as they know. In your heart, he knows everything perfectly. That doesn't include a future free action of an agent that he gave libertarian free will to. So I think that's maybe where we differ, but I think I'm really focused on scripture.
Me too.
So what are there scriptural objections?
Well, I have two guardrails for doing theology. One, you can't violate a clear, or, you can't, you have to at least have a rational, a possibly true interpretation of scripture. So you're treating scripture with hermeneutic accuracy and carefulness, and then logic, logic and the rules of reason. And you got to stay in between there. So biblically, I earlier I referenced some of them, and but let's just start with the, if it is that, you're talking about the closer it gets to an event, this event that God prophesied with Cyrus was 200 years before the events took place. He knew it was going to happen, and this was in response to sin. And so if he didn't, and before all these people were even born, so God didn't, he wasn't even able to know them. With the open theists will say, well, what's that grounded in if they did not yet exist? Cyrus did not yet exist. And so then here comes a guy by name that comes and actually does everything that God prophesied. So this is a distant time where God knows things about people, a whole bunch of people, multitudes of people, that he knows with specificity and knows exactly what's the condition that is going to take place where Cyrus can free the Jews.
Yeah, I would turn that on its head. I think he's calling his shots. He's not knowing something with specificity that's going to happen. He's saying, I'm going to make this happen.
To free the Jews?
I think God's, yes.
How did he know that?
He brings judgment on the clouds. He judges cities through Assyria. So how does this work? How does God do it?
Sins, right? Unless God's determining these sins and evils, then if people have libertarian freedom that don't even exist yet, how does he know that they're not going to be set free beforehand unless God's making it happen? And that's what we want to avoid. And the same is true with Peter. When we go to Peter's specific 3 denials, it's not just that Peter had one time I think it was Warren, I was having a conversation with, or one of his colleagues, and he said, no, Jesus at that point, since it was so close to the events, of that night knew that Peter had a Jesus denying nature at that time. And I'm like, oh, specifically a 3 denial nature in that short window of opportunity. Why not a 1, 2, or a 4 denial nature? How did he know 3 times, especially when all the people surrounding that, there's free agents all walking around that.
But okay,
time.
So we're going to probably just have to agree to disagree, because I see that God could know every single one of those free agents in such an intimate way that he knows when they're going to wake up or when they're going to go get food or all of the things that are going to happen like he knows the current state perfectly, everything, right? And he knows hearts. He knows where people are headed and what they're thinking. So I don't think that's too small for God.
But it sounds like you're saying he's aware of some they will act in such a way freely, and he's aware of the determinism that results in that.
I know that my kid is going to do X tomorrow,
but you don't really know. But you don't really know.
But I know. But I know.
That's Candace Owens talking. I don't know, but I know.
But I also don't have the ability like God does to read my kid's mind. Like I know what he's going to do without knowing his inner thoughts, but God knows everything.
But here's the thing. We can't use that when it comes to the Cyrus stuff, but with the Peter stuff, it gets really ad hoc to say that Jesus was aware of all the hearts and minds of all these free agents roaming around, that it was going to be a specific 3 times in a short window.
I think there's more assumptions that are being made, though. Who said Jesus knew that? The Father could have told him. Like the
but that's ad hoc
for sure. It's not. But what you're saying is things are not possible, or you're discounting them because your view is that the probability that this could happen potentially is low. And I'm saying I think it's possible.
I'm saying sure it's possible, but
it's possible.
But like as we do when we're doing the historical evidence of the resurrection, you start ruling out options that get ad hoc when you don't need to, and when you have when you have a great model here in Molinism that doesn't do anything ad hoc versus this open theist view that this ad hoc view that makes sense of Peter doesn't even work on Cyrus, you're going to say, well, what's the better explanation? And that's why at the very last sentence of the book, I say, based on all the data, and part of that, I say one part of being a good systematic theologian is not to violate the rules of logic or the rules of reason, laws of logic or the rules of reason. Well, when you start making ad hoc moves on one view and you don't have any on the other view, the inference to the best explanation is the one that's not making ad hoc moves. And especially when that ad hoc move doesn't make sense of all the relevant.
Is labeling these moves ad hoc fair, though? Because it's said multiple times that God has infinite wisdom. His knowledge surpasses all depth. So with all of that knowledge and the power that God has to influence minds and hearts and the Holy Spirit working in believers and all that, I think it's not ad hoc that God could use that. And instead of like the call to the idols saying, God's saying to the idols, they're powerless. I can do what I say I'm going to do. He's not saying, I see what's going to happen and they don't. He's that whole context of that passage with God and the idols is about refuting their power, saying they're just stone. They're just wood. They can't even do anything. I can do what I say, right? Mm-hmm. From the beginning, I declared what I'm going to do and I do it, right?
All right. So let's talk about this. If God's going to this is going to lead to a micromanaging God. If he's going to get what he's prophesying about, whether at great distance or in great detail, and then he has to micromanage and start influencing a whole bunch of things to get right. So
I mean, he's got to influence what is necessary for his plan, which is to reunite humanity in Christ. And I don't even think there's specificity.
Now look, so the only difference between your view and the Calvinist view at this point is this. The Calvinist says God's decree provides the antecedent conditions sufficient to necessitate all these events, and yours is God's decree plus his active causal influence in all of our lives is sufficient to guarantee the results. They're almost the same. And when you start doing that with all the different, when you start doing that with all the evil that's involved and all these scenarios, now you've got the only difference between the open theist view and the Calvinist is God determines evil and God heavily influences evil to make it happen.
See, I don't see that at all. God's a warrior king. God's in the world influencing a fallen world, right? He is working.
I agree. I affirm that much. But the
sure, so that's, I mean, but he's not
problems
saying
that I've
that.
raised. Look,
Yeah.
I am agreeing with you that God can do these things. I'm a libertarian who believes that God influences, but I sure don't say that God is going to influence like a micromanager to guarantee all the evil that's going to happen so that God can.
I don't say that at all. I think that's a mischaracterization. He's not determining evil. And I know you guys have to go. And
I didn't say that. I'm using influence. So look, you're saying you don't see it. I'm telling you, I see it clear as day. And I'm just going to respectfully challenge you to go home and think about this and then email me and let's continue the conversation.
Well, you know, what's great about this is that was a nice kind of, obviously not discourteous, but fiery sort of final back and forth. So I sure appreciate that.
We're brothers.
Book 42. And I'll tell you what, you and the other open theists and open theist leaning people that have called in today have certainly done a lot, I think, to present the view to others. And so I think that, and all of you have been, you know, well-spoken, articulate and all that. And so I appreciate you helping us out.
And nice in the heat of disagreement. So thank you, Brian.
I get passionate and I'm sorry because I do too. I see things in such a way and I read the Bible and it seems clear to me. And I know other people do too. And I want to have grace for them, but I get passionate about it.
Hey,
that's how we're wired.
Totally.
Some people are wired like that. And I'm cool with it.
As soon as you came on, Brian, there was somebody who jumped out and said, I like this guy. I thought, I know what they mean. He brought an energy. So, all right. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Brian. And
Brian, are you on
see you
Facebook?
Again. Tim, thanks for staying on. Pritchett fell off. We have one casualty here, but you have stayed on. I didn't know it was going to be this long. Last time we had trouble getting people to come on with Leighton Flowers. I think this was a better show in that regard than the Leighton Flowers show, is we had a lot of activity and most of the people were disagreeing with you about some things, but I thought you did a fantastic job. And they didn't convince me, Tim. I'm still a Molinist.
Well, at least we got that much out of the deal.
No, this was fantastic, folks. Tim's book is in the description, as well as his website and his YouTube channel, all linked in the description. He's got a second edition coming out, but you can get the current one right now, and it's available on Kindle too, I think, and has a study guide. Also, if you appreciate what we're doing here, help us out on Patreon at patreon.com/Trinity Radio. You get regularly get a lot of other free stuff, and you're helping us with a mission to get my book, Core Facts, and me personally into churches. I've got meetings coming up this year and training people in apologetics. And of course, that always involves discussions about soteriology. And so thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Tim, any final thoughts?
Braxton, thank you. And to Jonathan, who's no longer here. Thanks, guys, for bringing me on today. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into a couple days ago. Like, hey, you want to do? I thought people were going to be just writing stuff in the live chat, and like literally like 5 or 10 minutes before I get on, you're like, no, people are actually calling in. I'm like, oh wow, this is going to be interesting, and I just had so much fun. I appreciate everybody that came on, even with some of the passionate disagreements. I thought everybody was cool, and I don't mind that at all. So we're all,
dude, I thought this was awesome. And I'll tell you this afterwards, so you'll know I'm telling you the truth, but I really thought you did a fantastic job and just answered it was not so much you like debating as it was you teaching and helping people understand. So,
well, that's a good segue into encouraging people to go to Trinity.
TrinityStem.edu, TrinitySEM.edu. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a request for more information. I would love for you to fill that out, even if you think you might want to be a student 10 years from now. And you don't have to be going into professional ministry to take advantage of this. We have a lot of people who just want to go deeper in the Word. You can take classes in apologetics and other stuff with Dr. Tim Stratton. Tim, thanks so much for being here. And to the rest of you all, I'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.